Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Saad Meliti. I'm a second year medical student. And today I'll be explaining you guys two lectures, Hemodynamics 1 and 2, taught by Dr. Abdul Jabbar. So right down here is my email, and over here is my number. If you guys want to contact me, any questions about this lecture, yani. And right now, for those who are in the session, if you guys have any questions, feel free to write it down in the chat or just interrupt me, yani. It's completely fine. We're going to begin right now. So here are the objectives. We don't care too much about the objectives, so I'm just going to move on. So let's go to our first concept, okay? Parallel versus series, okay? So right now I have two pictures. One is of a series circuit and the other is of a parallel circuit, okay? Now these are electrical circuits, okay? But something that's really cool about hemodynamics is that a lot of the equations actually relate back to electrical circuits, the equations we get from electrical circuits. So let's explain each one. So in a series circuit, let's just imagine it like blood going through the heart. So this is the heart. The blood goes through compartment 1, compartment 2, compartment 3, and goes back to the heart, okay? Notice how all the blood is going through each compartment equally, okay? Now in a parallel circuit, we can imagine that this is the heart and the blood is going through the heart, but then it starts to divide into different compartments. And the thing about parallel circuits is that each compartment gets a different amount of flow. So مثلا, if we say that the heart is pumping out 5 liters of blood, we could say that this compartment is getting 3 liters, this compartment is getting 1 liter, and the other compartment is getting another liter. And we can manage this, okay? So we're gonna see how the body manages blood flow, basically, throughout this lecture. So the parallel circuit is a good example of the systemic circulation, and the series circuit is a good example of the pulmonary circulation. And I'm going to go show you guys that right now. So let's look at this picture. This is a picture of the entire cardiovascular system, okay? And something that's important to note is that the cardiovascular system is a closed system. What a closed system means is that basically nothing enters the vessels and nothing leaves the vessels, okay? So everything that leaves the left ventricle will eventually come back to the left ventricle, okay? Nothing's being added, nothing's being lost, okay? So this is a bunch of text, and what I'm going to do is just explain it through this drawing, okay? Not this drawing, this diagram. So we start off with the left ventricle, okay? The left ventricle pumps its blood through the aorta, okay? So it goes through the aorta, and then it starts to divide into a bunch of arterioles, okay? So you can imagine that this entire thing are just arterioles, okay? Once it goes through the arterioles, it then goes to the capillaries, okay? These are capillaries right here. So capillaries for the GI tract, for skeletal muscle, for the kidneys, for example. Once the capillaries start combining together, they go into venules, okay? These are venules. And then through the venules, it goes back through the vena cava, which is just a vein, so the largest vein. And then this goes through the right atrium. If I remember when I was telling you guys about parallel circulation, this right here is an example of parallel circulation. So the cardiac output, okay, from the left ventricle is getting divided to each compartment. So the kidneys are getting 25% of the blood flow. The stomach is getting 25% of the blood flow. The vessels to the heart, which are the coronary vessels, are getting only 5%. And this is something we can control and something I'm going to explain later down in the lecture. But we control this through constricting and dilating the arterioles, okay? So these things are what control the blood flow to each different organ, okay? So once the heart gets to the right atrium, it goes to the right ventricle. And once it goes to the right ventricle, it just goes through the lungs and back to the left atrium. Now, this is what I was saying when I was talking about earlier. And the pulmonary circulation is an example of, what's it called? A series circuit. All of the blood leaving the right ventricle, 100% of it is going through the lungs, okay? And then it goes to the left atrium. That's an example of a series circuit. Now, the systemic circulation is parallel circuit, okay? I hope that makes sense. This is everything written down in text. I won't go over it. This is just if you want to read it, yani, but I explained everything on the diagram. Al-mafrud. Okay, so I believe you guys took this in another lecture, which is just the equation for cardiac output. But just in case, I'll explain it again. So cardiac output is equal to the stroke volume times heart rate, okay? So what is stroke volume? Stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped out of the left ventricle with every heartbeat. With every heartbeat, how much blood are we pumping out? That's stroke volume. Heart rate, on the other hand, is just the number of heartbeats per minute. So you could say, oh, I have a heart rate of 80 beats per minute. So every minute, your heart is pumping 80 times. But if we multiply these two values together, we get the cardiac output, which is the amount of blood the heart pumps in 1 minute. So I just want to show this with an example. And imagine that this is your heart right here, okay? And imagine it's pumping at 70 beats per minute, okay? And every pump or every heartbeat is 70 milliliters leaving the left ventricle, okay? So if we multiply these together, look at this. You have 70 milliliters per beat. This right here is stroke volume. 70 beats per minute, that's your heartbeat, okay? And if we just multiply them, we can cancel out the beats here. And you're eventually going to get, what you're going to get when you multiply 70 by 70 is 4,900 milliliters per minute, okay? But then what we did is we just converted the milliliters to liters. So we ended up with 4.9 liters every minute. So every minute, 4.9 liters of blood are leaving the heart, okay? That's cardiac output, okay? So now that we know what cardiac output is, we can also just figure out what venous return is, okay? So venous return is the amount of blood that returns to the right atrium through the veins every minute. And in normal situations, the cardiac output is going to be equal to the venous return, okay? So you can just imagine, like I said before, the cardiovascular system is purely, it's a closed system, okay? So because it's a closed system, nothing is entering and nothing is leaving. So everything that leaves the left ventricle, logically, it should go through the blood and go back to the right atrium. That's how that works. But that's why, under normal conditions, the venous return is equal to the cardiac output. Now, there are a few things that can affect the venous return or the blood that's going back to the right atrium. The first one is force of the heart, okay? And basically, like we said before, the cardiac output is going to be equal to the venous return, okay? So let's say we increase the contractility of the heart, okay? If the contractility of the heart was increased, for example, we'd have a higher venous return because, like I said before, the cardiac output under the venous return, under normal conditions is going to be equal to the cardiac output, okay? If we decrease the cardiac output, then we'd have less venous return, okay? I hope that makes sense, Yang. Okay, so now I'm going to go into a bit more detail into the other three, which are recoil of the arterial walls, negative pressure in the thorax, and venous compression by skeletal muscle. So let's go through these one by one. So recoil of the arterial walls, okay? So let's imagine that the heart is just here, okay? But this is the heart, Yani, okay? And it's pumping blood, okay? So when it pumps blood, we can't actually we can't actually push all this blood through the capillaries at once. If we do that, what's going to happen is that the capillaries are going to burst because there's so much pressure. So what the aorta does, but imagine right here, this is the aorta. The aorta expands, okay? So it starts taking in an excess amount of volume. It expands, okay? And what it does is it's basically buffering the blood, okay? It's making sure that we don't send all the blood flow through the capillaries, okay? So this is systole, okay, when the heart contracts. So when the heart relaxes, what happens to the arterial walls, method, for example, the aorta, it's going to recoil back, okay, because the aorta has, and arteries in general, they have a huge amount of elasticity. So it's going to recoil. And because we have the aortic valve here, okay, so like I said, imagine like everything behind here is the left ventricle. There's a valve right now that's closed, okay? So the blood can't be pushed backwards. So the blood only has one way to go, which is forwards. And this is also known as the Windkessel effect. And it's basically what helps the blood flow through the body when the heart is relaxed, okay? We're going to also go through this concept again in hemodynamics 2, I think. But then that's the general idea, okay? So for negative pressure in the thorax, this is also something we're going to take later. But basically, blood flows from a high pressure to a low pressure. So the pressure in the aorta is like around 120 systolic. And all the way at the right atrium, it's at only 2 millimeters mercury, okay? So what we can do is calculate this pressure gradient, okay? Pressure gradient is what drives the flow of blood, okay? So if we have a higher pressure gradient, we're going to have a higher amount of flow or like faster amount of flow, for example. So what's it called? We can calculate the pressure gradient through a simple equation, is just taking the blood pressure at the start of the vessel and minusing it by the blood pressure at the end of the vessel. So in this example, I used the peripheral venous compartment and the central venous compartment, okay? The central venous compartment is basically the veins and anything like the veins above the diaphragm, okay? So this is the thorax, and the thorax is anything above the diaphragm, basically. So right here, we have 2 millimeters of mercury, and this is specifically in the right atrium, okay? Over here, we have the peripheral venous compartment, which is the blood pressure in the veins of the leg, for example, okay? It's under the diaphragm. So what we can do is we can take 10 minus 2 to get 8, okay? So that's our pressure gradient right there, okay? Now, something that's very interesting is that when we take an inhalation, or when we inhale, sorry, the blood pressure in the right atrium drops from 2 millimeters mercury to negative 5 millimeters mercury, okay? So now the pressure gradient, instead of being 8, has just gone. So it's 10 minus 5 now, right? So now it's become 15. So our pressure gradient is now way bigger. So that's what we mean by negative pressure in the thorax. So basically, when we inhale, we can increase the pressure gradient back to the right atrium, so increasing the venous return, okay? I hope that makes sense. So last but not least, venous compression by skeletal muscle. So let's say you're standing up, okay? When you're standing up, what's it called? The gravity brings the blood vessels, the gravity brings the blood down, okay? And where is it going to pool? It's going to go all the way to the veins of the leg, okay? And it's going to stay there, okay? So we want to bring that blood back to the heart, okay? And the way we can do that is by contracting our skeletal muscles in the leg. So let's say we start walking, okay? Or exercising or anything, running, okay? So look at this. This is a relaxed vein, or sorry, this is when we're relaxed, okay? We're not contracting anything. We have a vein here. If we stand up for too long, we can get peripheral edema. Yes, actually, here, in most cases, our body can compensate and push the blood back up to our heart. But for some people with, what's it called? Maybe faulty blood, vein valves or something like that, or they're just incapable of pushing it back up, they can get peripheral edema. Yeah, exactly. I hope I explained that well, Yani. So when we start moving, our leg muscles contract, okay? And remember that we have, okay, my pen isn't drawn. Okay, there we go. So remember that we have vein valves, okay? We have valves in the vein. They prevent backflow, okay? So when we contract, once again, the blood vessel wall starts to get squeezed and the blood has no way to go but up. So it starts going up to the heart, okay? And that's pretty much it. That's all the things that can affect venous return, okay? So now that we've talked about what can increase venous return or affect venous return, let's also see what causes resistance to flow, okay? Now, remember earlier, I was showing you guys that diagram of the vessels. Yeah, I think it's better to explain this if I just draw it. Okay, so this is the aorta. And then the aorta divides into a bunch of arterioles, okay? And then you have a bunch of compartments here, okay? We could say that this is the kidney, for example. This is the stomach. This one is, I don't know, literally anything. It could be any organ. So they all merge to a bunch of veins, and that's that. So the main resistance to blood flow, okay, is in the arterioles, okay? So let's say, khalas, we don't want blood flow. Let's say this is the GI tract, okay? Let's say we don't want blood to go back to the stomach, for example. What we can do is we can cause this to vasoconstrict, okay? So instead of being big like this, it becomes really small, okay? And when that happens, the percentage of blood flow, okay, so the cardiac output, let's say it's 5 liters, and let's say that before the GI was getting 1 liter of blood, for example, if we vasoconstrict, the GI will now not get 1 liter, it's going to get maybe 0.5 liters, okay? And this blood that is not going to the GI can go to other more important places. But we have 2 ways to do that. Wait. No, arterioles, hey, I'll explain what arterioles are, but they're not the smallest arteries. So they're not the capillaries, okay? The capillaries are, wait, let me go back to the drawing. Okay. So مثلا, this is an arteriole, and this would be like the GI tract, okay, for example. The capillaries would be here. This is where oxygen and nutrient exchange happens. The thing right before the capillaries is the arterioles, okay? Yeah, you guys take this more in histology, but come on, I'm going to go into it in the next few slides. But yeah, the arterioles are not the smallest, but they're right before the capillaries, okay? They're exactly right before the capillaries. I hope that makes sense. So we can control the arterioles through two receptors. Okay. Okay. We can control the arterioles through two receptors. We have the alpha-1 adrenergic and the beta-2 adrenergic. Does anyone know what I mean when I say adrenergic, Owen? Like, can anyone answer? Okay, not exactly hormonal. Okay, I'll explain it. Okay, adrenergic. Wait, did I get someone else? Adrenergic is sympathetic. Ah, this left. Oh no, okay. It's someone direct messaged me. Okay, so adrenergic is sympathetic, the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so when we say adrenergic, what's it called? Sorry for keep going back and forth. So we have adrenergic receptors. Adrenergic. Sorry for my handwriting. Adren adrenergic. Okay, perfect. And we have cholinergic. Yeah, I don't want to go too much in detail, but cholinergic is parasympathetic. Adrenergic is sympathetic. Okay. So when we say sympathetic nervous system, we mean norepinephrine and epinephrine. Okay. When we say cholinergic, we mean acetylcholine. Okay. So adrenergic receptors are specific to the sympathetic nervous system. Okay. Don't worry too much about sympathetic or parasympathetic, but then no. Actually, you should know that we're basically stimulating these receptors with norepinephrine. Okay. Oh, wait, something's in chat. Yeah, okay. So there's two receptors, alpha-1 adrenergic, and this causes vasoconstriction for most arterioles in the body. Okay. Then we have beta-2 adrenergic, and these cause vasodilation. Okay. But they only cause vasodilation to skeletal and heart muscles. Yeah, it seems counterintuitive that we're vasoconstricting in the sympathetic nervous system, but basically, let's say you're running away from like a tiger or something, okay? Your sympathetic nervous system is going crazy, right? So what's happening when you're running? You're using your muscles a lot. You're using your muscles a lot, right? Your heart is pumping faster. Your skeletal muscles are pumping way harder. What they need is more oxygen. So the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the beta-2 adrenergic to increase the blood flow to the skeletal and heart muscles. And methadone in the sympathetic nervous system, what's it called? When you're running away from something, once again, you don't really need your GI tract, for example. So it's going to stimulate the alpha-1 adrenergic receptors, and it's going to cause vasoconstriction, okay? So those parts of the body that are useless now, like the stomach, for example, we don't need it, right? So it's going to get less blood flow, while the skeletal muscle and heart muscles, the things that are more important that we need right now, are going to get the blood flow, okay? And I'll show you guys a slide about that right now. So let's say we're exercising. Here, it's not and we don't need blood flow. Someone just asked me if we don't need blood flow. Here, we don't need blood flow, but we need less blood flow. So what I meant was basically, and when we're running away from something, our stomach doesn't need to be processing food right now. Our body's more focused on running away from that thing, for example. But it's going to decrease the blood flow to that organ, like the stomach, for example. But the flow isn't going to be non-existent. There's still going to be blood flow to keep it alive. But the blood flow is just going to be decreased because it doesn't need that much attention right now. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. Okay, perfect. Halas. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to explain it right now, actually. And when we're exercising, okay, look at this. This is our, what's it called? This is our cardiac output. This is 5 liters, okay? Now, when we exercise, our cardiac output becomes 17.5 liters, okay? So our cardiac output has obviously increased, okay? Because we're exercising, we need more blood flow throughout all the body, right? Now, not just that, notice this. So this is the distribution of blood in all the different compartments. The skeletal muscle is getting 20% of the blood flow, right? The stomach, the abdominal organs are getting 24%. But when we start exercising, look what happens. The skeletal muscle starts to get 73% of the blood flow, while the abdominal organs only get 3%, okay? That's a huge decrease. Why? Like I said before, we're exercising. Our body doesn't want to process food right now. It wants to focus on the skeletal muscle that is currently undergoing strenuous exercise and supplying it with oxygen. It's written down in text. I'll explain it. So the muscle and heart vasodilate due to signals from metabolites. So basically, the heart as well, by the way, the heart starts pumping faster, صح? Our muscles are working faster. They're contracting more, okay? This causes the release of metabolites. These metabolites cause vasodilation. Not just that, remember those beta 1 receptors I was talking about earlier? Not beta 1, sorry. Beta 2 receptors I was talking about earlier? The sympathetic nervous system is going to stimulate those and cause vasodilation to these organs, the muscle and heart, because they're the ones that need the most blood flow right now. Do we need to memorize how much cardiac output we have in different organs? Not at all. You do not need to know this. Yeah, this is just for like what's called visualizing. You don't need to know any values or anything like that. This is just for visualization. So what's it called? Yeah, so we increase the blood flow to the skeletal muscle in the heart. Now the skin has alpha-1 adrenergic receptors. Here's the thing. When our skeletal muscles and our heart are working a lot, they produce a lot of heat. So the way the body gets rid of the heat is sending the blood to the skin. When the blood goes to the skin, it can kind of like exchange heat with the outside world and go outside the body. So that's why instead of stimulating the alpha-1 receptors on the skin, the body decreases sympathetic stimulation of alpha-1 receptors. And this would cause reduced constriction. So مثلا, the blood vessel is this small, okay? When we decrease sympathetic stimulation, it's going to become bigger, okay? I hope that makes sense. So that's why the skin also gains a bit of extra blood flow to dissipate the heat, okay? Now, in the case of abdominal organs like the stomach, their alpha-1 receptors are going to start getting more sympathetic stimulation, which causes vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction basically just means less blood flow to that specific organ. That's that for this slide. I think I spent a bit too much time on this, but I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now we're actually going to go into the different blood vessels and their physiological roles. So first, we're going to start off with the artery. The artery is the first thing. An example of the artery is the aorta, for example. Now, the arteries are highly elastic. If you guys remember in a previous slide, I showed you guys the aorta distending, right? And then recoiling, okay? So their job is to stretch open when blood goes through them. And then in diastole, they recoil, okay? And because of, like the valve, like the what's it called, the aortic valve, the blood goes forward, okay? It basically just recoils and pushes the blood forward towards the rest of the body, okay? That's the job of arteries, like the aorta, for example. Arterioles are right before capillaries, okay? They're smaller than arteries, for example. They're smaller than arteries, of course, and they determine the distribution of the cardiac output, okay? What this sentence means is basically what I'm showing you here. You see how we have 17.5 liters, and it's distributed differently across all the compartments. The thing that distributes things differently is the arterioles. So over here, we vasodilated the arterioles to give more blood flow to the skeletal muscle. For the abdominal organs, we vasoconstricted the arterioles to decrease the blood flow to the abdominal organs. That's the job of arterioles. That's why we say they determine the distribution of the cardiac output, okay? I hope that makes sense. Now, capillaries are the site of exchange, okay? They have the largest total surface area. Okay, so basically, once you get to an organ, you have a bunch of capillaries, millions of capillaries, okay? And these capillaries just exchange oxygen and nutrients with the organ. Khalas, that's it. And this is really important to know, is that they have the largest total surface area. And this, we'll come back and talk about this later, why this is important. But what you should know is that they are the site of exchange of nutrients and oxygen, and they have the largest total surface area. Okay, so now venules. Venules are just the merging of capillaries. For Abdul Jabbar's lecture, he didn't talk about venules much. They're not that important for this lecture, but they're basically just the merging of capillaries, okay? Now, the veins, on the other hand, are very important because they're highly distensible, okay? They're very compliant, and I'll explain that in a second. So because they're very compliant, they act as a blood reservoir, and they can hold the largest proportion of blood in the CVS. So the cardiovascular system, in the cardiovascular system, 60% of the blood is held in the veins. And I'm going to explain that right now. So basically, we have a vein, right? Now the vein is just chilling, and then a bunch of blood goes through it. And when the blood goes through it, it starts to distend or expand, okay? Now, unlike the arteries, which recoil and push the blood forward, the veins distend and stay like that. Khalas. They just distend and hold the blood. So because of that, they hold the most blood in the body because they act as reservoirs because of that. Because they distend and khalas, they don't go back to their original position. Yes, exactly. Veins are compliant. Veins are the most compliant, vessel in the body, and because of that, they can hold a huge amount of blood. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So now we're talking about the different vessels in the body. So we're gonna move on. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to the actual lecture. Basically, the hemodynamics describes the flow of blood through the blood vessels. So a few things you need to know about blood vessels. Yeah, I don't think this is too important to know, but blood vessels are not rigid tubes. Okay, they're actually compliant. Okay, compliant is exactly what I was talking about earlier. And the blood vessel can stretch out. Okay, it's right here. There's a picture right here. So this is non-compliant. Okay, no matter how much pressure you add to it, it won't expand. But an artery, okay, like the aorta, for example, you add blood to it and pressure, and it'll expand outwards. Okay. Now, another important thing to know is that blood isn't a uniform liquid. What's it called? For example, in the blood, we have a bunch of proteins, red blood cells, all that stuff. It's not equally distributed through the blood. What I mean by that is that, you can have an area of the blood with more proteins and another area with less proteins, okay? It's not equally distributed around all the blood vessels. This kind of affects the flow of blood. That's all you need to know from this slide. So let's get into actual blood flow. Blood flow is laminar, okay? Blood flow is fastest in the center. Blood is slowest near the wall, okay? It's that simple. So in laminar flow, look at this. This is a picture of laminar flow. In the center, we have the blood here. It's in the center. It's flowing the fastest, right? It's the one that's most ahead, okay? But as we get closer to the wall, this is the slowest. It's not far ahead at all. It's behind, right? So that's what we mean by laminar flow. And it kind of moves in this parabola shape, okay? It moves in a shape like this, with the blood flow being fastest in the center and the slowest near the wall, okay? Okay. Let's move on. So because blood is thick and viscous, it can push against the vessel wall. We call this shear stress, okay? So look at the blood that's near the vessel wall. It can push against the blood vessel wall. This is basically pressure, shear stress. This is what we call, this is shear stress, okay? It's basically pressure on the blood vessel wall caused by the blood near the blood vessel wall, okay? Something that can affect shear stress is the speed of the blood. So if we have blood that's going fast, the shear stress is going to be more. So and let's say we have slow blood flow, the shear stress on the blood vessel won't be that much. But if we have blood that is going extremely fast, really fast, the shear stress is going to be way higher, okay? I hope that makes sense. Let's move on. So now we're going to talk about another kind of flow, which is not normal to have, except only in one case, which I'll explain. So let's say the blood velocity is so fast, okay? We have a huge amount of blood velocity, or like the blood flow is very fast. Or we have a narrow opening in the vessel, like this, for example. This looks to me like atherosclerosis, which is just a plaque of fat that accumulates in the blood vessel wall, okay? So because of this, the blood that passes through this kind of narrowing will speed up by a lot, okay? So because of this, it'll cause something called turbulent flow, okay? Turbulent flow. Remember laminar flow, we had in the center the fastest flow, and near the vessel wall, we had the slowest flow. Look at turbulent flow. You can't understand what's going on. It's very random. The flow doesn't make sense at all. It's random flow, okay? That's turbulence, okay? That's it. Now, turbulence can cause something called a cardiac murmur or a bruit, okay? So and let's say we have aortic stenosis, okay? The aortic valve is more constricted. You're gonna have turbulence because, like, imagine that this is the aortic valve and it's just very constricted. The blood is gonna flow through it extremely fast because of that. And because of that, you're gonna have turbulence. Or you can have it in a peripheral artery. In that case, you're gonna hear something called a bruit, okay? Let's say you have turbulent flow in the abdominal artery. You can use a stethoscope and you're going to hear a bruit, okay? Here, صراحة, I don't think it's too important to know this information, but it was on the slides, okay? Another thing that can affect turbulent flow or laminar flow, like cause turbulent flow, is blood viscosity. So let's say you have anemia. Okay, in anemia, you have decreased red blood cells. Okay, that's going to cause a decreased blood viscosity. When we have decreased blood viscosity, you're going to have turbulence. Okay, it's as simple as that. Okay, now there's one case in the body where we're going to have normal, not normal, we're going to have physiological turbulent flow. Yani basically, it's the only case where it's normal to have turbulent flow. Okay, basically, when an artery branches, okay, it's going to go like this. And in the process, the flow is going to become a bit turbulent. But notice how after it, right away, it becomes normal again, right away. So that's the only case where we're going to see turbulent flow normally in the body. Okay. So now we have an equation. Okay. This is called Reynolds number, and this can predict turbulence. Okay. So look at this picture. If the Reynolds number is low, مثلا 2000, we're going to have laminar flow. But if we have a Reynolds number of above 3000, we're going to have turbulent flow. So let's go through the different parts of the equation. We have RE, Reynolds number. It's equal to the velocity times the diameter of the tube times the density of the fluid. The density, it's not too important, I don't think. It wasn't talked about much. Divided by the viscosity of the fluid, okay? So let's say we increase the velocity, okay? When we increase the velocity, we're going to have a higher Reynolds number. Let's say we increase the diameter of the tube. We're also going to have a higher Reynolds number. Now, for example, if we increase the viscosity of the fluid, can anyone tell me what happens to the Reynolds number? Decrease. Okay, exactly. Exactly. It goes down. The Reynolds number will go down. So the more viscous the fluid, the more laminar the flow is going to be. And like I said before, when we have anemia, we're going to have a decrease in the viscosity. In this case, the Reynolds number is going to increase, and we're going to have a chance of turbulent flow. So that's all you need to know for this equation, inshallah. So we're going to move on now. Yeah, there's a bunch of words on the slide, so I think it's better if I just explain it on a blackboard. So let's say we have a blood vessel wall. Okay, this blood vessel wall has a what's it called? A wall, okay? So over here, we have blood flowing. This blood is causing shear stress, okay? Shear stress is just pressure, okay? Basically pressure. So this inner pressure is known as, wait, let me delete all these arrows. This pressure is known as PI, okay? The pressure inside caused by the blood, for example, okay? You also have pressure acting outside of the blood vessel, okay? This is called PO, the pressure outside, okay? And basically, what we can do is we can take the pressure inside minus the pressure outside, and we can get the difference of pressure across the blood vessel wall, okay? And that's going to be important when we talk about tension. Now, tension, we're going to talk about it right now. It's equal to the pressure difference, which is PI minus PO, okay, times the radius of the blood vessel. I think R is like this. Okay. And the radius, as you guys know, is just this. It's half of the diameter, okay? This is the radius, okay? So basically, if we increase the pressure inside, the tension is going to increase. What is tension? Tension is the force that the blood vessel wall has to push back on the pressure inside to maintain its shape. So basically, the blood vessel wall wants to resist dilating or like growing, okay, becoming bigger. So this is what the tension is. The tension is resisting that force, okay? If the pressure, for example, became too high, what's it called? The tension is going to increase so much that the blood vessel wall can't handle it, and it's going to expand, okay? I hope that makes sense. So everything is written down here. We have the pressure inside stretching the vessel. So this pressure, we have the pressure outside. We have the pressure difference, which is PI minus PO. And then what's it called? Increased pressure inside increases wall tension. Now here's another important thing and a way you can visualize tension. Think of a balloon, okay? What's it called? You haven't blown into the balloon yet. The radius of this balloon is very small. So if we go to the tension equation, sorry for writing it down again. Okay, times R. The radius is extremely low, right? So the tension is also very low. But even when you're blowing into it extremely hard, it's going to feel like there's a lot of resistance to pushing out the... Yeah, I'm explaining the what's it called, the R's relation to the equation right now. What's it called? So, what was I saying? Yeah. So in a small balloon, you have a small radius, right? So because of this small radius, the tension is also going to be low. So let's say you have a balloon, you haven't blown into it yet. You start blowing into it. Remember, you guys have blown into a balloon, Slack. When you blow into a balloon, it's difficult at first to get it to expand. Okay, but once it becomes bigger, way bigger. Okay, this is a balloon. Look at the radius. The radius has become large. Let me just go back to the original equation. But instead of having a small radius, you have a higher radius. Okay, and the tension, as a result, has increased. So now you can, what's it called? The radius has increased, the tension has increased. So the pressure you're putting into the balloon has a huge difference now, and it's easier to make the balloon expand. Tension, okay. Tension, what does tension mean? Okay, so let's say we have a blood vessel. Wow, this is a pretty bad circle. Blood vessel wall. Okay. So we have pressure inside pushing on the blood vessel wall. Okay. Tension is just the force from inside the blood vessel wall, like this inside, pushing against the pressure inside. It's basically resisting expansion. Okay. But as long as the blood vessel can, the blood vessel tries its best to make this force equal. So the force here is going to be equal to the force here. Okay. Now at some point the tension gets too high for the blood vessel to push back on, so the blood vessel will expand. Does that make sense? I can re-explain it again, if you want. Okay, perfect. I'm glad you got it, Yanni. Okay. So remember when I was talking about the balloon with a small radius? Now, put this into the context of capillaries, okay? Capillaries are the smallest blood vessel, okay? They have a very small radius, okay? So even if you put a lot of pressure into them, it's not going to matter. The tension is still going to be extremely low because capillaries are so small. They're like, the thickness is one cell, right? So the radius is extremely low. So that's why they can withstand rupture, okay, in the face of high pressure. So even if you have high pressure going through the capillaries, it doesn't matter because the radius of these capillaries is very small. I hope this makes sense. We're going to take this a step further now. Right now, what we can do is we can take the tension. Okay, this is P times R. This is the equation for tension, okay? Divided by the wall thickness, okay? Let me draw another blood vessel for you guys. Okay, this right here would be the wall thickness, okay? This is WT. This is wall thickness, okay? So if we take the tension, does having a small radius mean more tension? No, having a small radius, wait, let me go back. Having a small radius means less tension, because look, tension is equal to the pressure difference times the radius. If we decrease the radius, we're going to have way less tension. The capillaries will have no trouble at all withstanding the pressure because there's no tension being put on them. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope it makes, but they don't have more pressure. Yeah, okay, yeah. Wait. Let me go back. Yes, they do have more pressure, but remember, and the radius of capillaries is extremely slow. Wait, did you say something else? Small radius? Oh, but don't they have more pressure in smaller radius? Yeah, okay, you could say that, but and what's it called? Yeah, once again, you have to remember, and the radius of capillaries is extremely low, like really low. Yeah, like I said before, the radius is like one cell. Like the endothelium of a capillary is just one cell thickness, right? So the radius is so low, the pressure won't be that high. The pressure won't be high to the point that it overpowers this radius. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And I look over here, there is high pressure, but and the radius of capillaries is just really, really, really like small. It's extremely small. So the tension, as a result, won't be that high, even if you have an increased pressure in these capillaries. Does that make sense? Could I explain what is tension again? Yeah, of course I can explain what is tension again. Okay, I did. Okay. Uh, I really hope I can explain this properly. Basically, we have a blood vessel wall. Okay. We have pressure inside caused by blood. Okay. Pressure inside caused by blood. Okay. Now, normally, pressure would cause this blood vessel to expand? Okay, wait, let me draw this more bigger. And imagine a way bigger artery now, okay? Normally it would cause expansion. But to some degree, the arterial wall, or like the wall of a blood vessel, can resist this, okay? This is tension, okay? So this force right here is tension, okay? It's basically the force that the blood vessel has to withstand in order to not expand, okay? I hope this makes sense. Basically, there's a certain limit of tension that the blood vessel can resist. But let's say we have increased high pressure, the tension is going to be too high for the blood vessel to handle. So it's eventually going to expand. But to a certain limit, if the tension isn't high, the blood vessel, so let's say the tension isn't that high. Let's say there's a low pressure here. The blood vessel will be able to push back on the pressure inside and resist expanding. Okay? So basically, tension is the force that the blood vessel needs to put back. How do I say it? Tension is the force that the blood vessel needs to withstand in order to not expand. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense, Yani. I hope I'm making sense. If the tension gets too high, okay, perfect. If the tension gets too high, the blood vessel is going to expand, okay? But to a certain limit, the blood vessel can resist expansion as long as the tension is low enough, okay? I hope that made sense. How is this related to smaller radius? Here, okay, I'll do the example again. Here, I don't know exactly, but the way you can relate it is with a balloon, right? This is how I understood it as. You have a balloon, okay? Has a small radius, okay? This radius is very small, okay? When you blow into a balloon that you haven't blown into yet, like it's very small, it's going to be difficult to make it expand, right? That's because the radius is very low. So the tension is also very low, okay? So once you expand the balloon more and more, okay, you've expanded the balloon to a way bigger radius. So the radius now is a bit bigger. The balloon is easier to expand, right? That's because the radius is now larger. Your tension on the balloon has increased way more. That's the relationship of what's it called? Radius with tension. That's how it plays a role, Yani. This is the best way to think of it. I think the balloon example. A small balloon has a small radius. So it's very hard to make it expand because the tension is low. But once the radius becomes bigger, you won't have any trouble blowing into the balloon and making it bigger. Does that make sense? Doesn't tension decrease when it's easier to make it expand? Doesn't decrease? No, tension doesn't decrease. Yeah. Wait, let me delete everything again. Tension doesn't decrease. And how do I explain this? You have a blood vessel wall. Okay. Well, how do I explain this? Here, okay. Like we said before, where's the slide? Tension is equal to the pressure difference times radius. Okay. So even if the blood vessel wall expands, the tension is still there. Yeah. The pressure is still going to be there. The radius is increased. The tension is going to still be high. The fact that it expanded means it can't, what's it called? It can't stand the tension anymore. بس انه this is really difficult to explain. Okay, blood vessel wall. Okay, let's explain it like this. Imagine that, okay, this is not bad. Okay, this is a smaller blood vessel. Okay. So tension is the pressure inside, right? And tension is the amount of pressure, not pressure, but tension is the amount of force the blood vessel needs to withstand to stop expanding, okay? But once it expands, there's still that same tension, okay? The tension is still there. But now that it's expanded, it can resist the, what's it called? It can resist the expansion because now the pressure is more evenly spread out across the blood vessel wall. I really hope I'm making sense. Am I making sense? The tension is still there. The exact same tension is still there, but it expanded to accommodate the tension, okay? If you keep adding more tension, it's going to get even bigger. Does that make sense? Okay. I really hope it made sense. I don't know if I'm explaining bad or not. Okay, no problem. طيب. Now we're going to get into the wall stress, okay? Wall stress is literally just tension divided by wall thickness. But like I said before, you have an artery, okay, and you have wall thickness, okay. This is the wall thickness right here, okay. So now imagine look, imagine this is the aorta, okay. The aorta has huge wall thickness, okay. But imagine something else, not the aorta, okay. So it has a smaller wall thickness, okay. So this is the wall thickness of this blood vessel, okay. Since the wall thickness in this blood vessel is way less, the wall stress is going to be way higher. Basically, this is just showing you how blood vessels resist tension, okay? So if you have a higher wall thickness like the aorta, it's going to have less wall stress, okay? So it's going to be stressed less because of the tension. So this has a, what's it called? It has a correlation with aneurysms. Basically, what's it called? Look at this right here. When we increase the pressure, we stretch out the wall, right? So when we stretch out the wall thickness is also going to decrease. So what's going to happen to the wall stress? It's going to increase. And the more we increase the wall stress, the more chance we have a rupture. So if the wall stress goes too high, we're going to have a rupture at some point. This is just basically tension divided by wall thickness. You can think of it as the more thick the wall is, the more tension it can accommodate before it just explodes. Okay? I hope this makes sense. And now we're going to look at aneurysms, which is just, what's it called? A clinical relationship with tension. We're going to explain like basically tension again. Let's look at this example. We have an aorta, okay? And let's say that the aorta has a weakening of the wall right here, okay? So what's going to happen? Here, originally, this blood vessel wall could withstand the tension, okay? But because of the weakening in the blood vessel wall, you're going to have this right here. It's a bump or like an expansion, okay? Because it can't, what's it called? It can't withstand the tension anymore in this specific area because of a weakening of the blood vessel wall. So you're going to have this, what's it called? This bulging here, okay? Now this leads to a positive feedback loop. Why? I'll tell you guys why. Look here. Look at the radius here. Okay, the radius here is okay. It's whatever. It's the radius. When we plug it into the equation, pi minus po times radius. The radius is small, I think. That's that. You're just going to get your normal tension, okay? But because of the blood vessel wall weakening, okay, and it can't withstand the normal tension and it's expanding outwards, look what happens to the radius. The radius went from this to this. The radius here is way bigger, Mishlah. So now that the radius increased, the tension is going to increase again, okay? That's kind of crazy, Annie. And even though it's expanding to withstand the tension, it just made more tension for itself, okay? So what's going to end up happening because of this increased radius and increased tension, the blood vessel wall is going to, I don't think I have space for this. The blood vessel wall is going to expand even more. Yeah, let me just draw it over here. The blood vessel wall, instead of this radius, is going to expand even more, okay? This is an over-exaggeration, but I know this is how it works. So now, instead of this radius, you're going to have an even bigger radius, okay? So a bigger radius means a bigger tension, okay? And remember, and wall stress is tension divided by wall thickness. You're stretching out this vessel so much that the wall thickness is thinning and thinning and thinning, and the wall stress is increasing, okay? So once this bulges out enough and the wall stress increases enough, it's going to burst. This is how aneurysms work. Yeah, basically, R and T keep increasing each other. It's a positive feedback loop, which is it's very interesting. So the R increases, and as a result, the tension increases. When the tension increases, the blood vessel wall, this weakened area, it can't withstand the increased tension. So it expands again, okay? Because of this expansion, you have a higher radius. Because of the higher radius, you have even more tension. But you can see why this is problematic. So a solution of this for aneurysms is something called a stent, okay? What we do is we just put like some metal thing, okay? It's not too important for you guys to know this. I doubt he'd ask it. But then you put a stent between here, and the blood flows through the stent, okay? And the pressure goes on the stent, okay? So now this aneurysm doesn't have any pressure or tension on it. Well, you're fine. You're going to be fine. So let's go back to the slide. Here, like I said before, increased radius leads to increased tension, which leads to more increased radius, which leads to more increased tension. But I explained it just right now, so I hope it makes sense. With a stent, basically just prevents what's it called? The blood to cause any more tension on the vessel wall because the blood flows through the stent. Okay, I hope this makes sense. So now we're done with all this tension stuff. I know it's very confusing. If you guys have any questions, well, I don't mind repeating any, because it's very difficult concept. So now we're just gonna move on. But if you guys have any questions, I don't mind going back. So now we're gonna be talking about the velocity, the blood volume, the diastolic and systolic, or the blood pressure in general, and the resistance in all the different blood vessels. This is velocity. Okay, velocity is just how fast the blood moves. Okay, so مثلا you could say the blood moves 100 centimeters in a second. Okay, in the case of this, it's in millimeters. Okay, so in the aorta, okay, which is right after the heart, it has the highest blood flow, and this makes sense because it's right after the heart. The heart just pumped. Okay, and all the blood is flushing through it at max speed. But in the arteries, you have the highest blood flow. Now, but as you can see, once you get to the capillaries, the blood flow, or the speed, sorry, the velocity decreases by a lot. It drops down to its least in the capillaries. And we're gonna see why in the next few slides, something like that. We're gonna see. So we're gonna see why capillaries are the slowest. Okay. Now, in terms of blood volume, look at here. It's like I said before, the veins are distensible. They're compliant. Okay. They don't have the elasticity of the aorta, so they don't recoil back. Because of their compliance, they can take volume and just take the volume and distend and keep it with them. But that's why 60% of the blood in the cardiovascular system is with the veins, okay? Because of their compliance, okay? Now we're going to look at blood pressure. Here, I told you guys this before. Blood flows from high pressure to low pressure, okay? So when we're in the aorta, we have two different pressures. We have systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. Systolic pressure is when the aorta distends, okay? And diastolic pressure is when the heart relaxes and the aorta recoils, okay? So once we get to the capillaries, there is no more systolic and diastolic. Khalas. So we get to the capillaries and we go all the way to the veins, to the right atrium where there's the lowest pressure. So highest to lowest, that's how blood flows, okay? And now we can see vascular resistance, okay? Vascular resistance is the most at the arterioles. Remember earlier in the lecture, I told you guys that arterioles are where we control the cardiac output, okay? So we vasoconstrict, we vasodilate the arterioles to increase blood flow or decrease blood flow to an organ. So that's why they have the highest resistance, okay? I hope this makes sense. So now we're going to move on to, this is the velocity, okay? So we're going to see why capillaries have the slowest blood velocity. So we have an equation. It's known as, doesn't have a name. It's just B, which is velocity, equals to the blood flow divided by the cross-sectional area, okay? We're going to define flow and velocity now. Flow is the volume of blood passing through a vessel or group of vessels over a period of time. So let's say this point right here, we can say that 200 milliliters are passing through this point every second, okay? That's very different from velocity. Velocity is like, we have this point and this point. We say that this is 100 centimeters, مثلا. The blood traverses 100 centimeters every second, okay? That's velocity, okay? But we can actually calculate the velocity by taking blood flow and just dividing it by the cross-sectional area, okay? That's what we're saying here. So velocity is proportional to blood flow and inversely proportional to cross-sectional area. But if we increase the cross-sectional area, we're going to have a decreased velocity. And this is exactly why the capillaries have the slowest flow of blood, or slowest velocity of blood, sorry. Capillaries, if you guys remember, what's it called? They have the highest total surface area, and this helps them exchange nutrients with organs, okay? So because of this high cross-sectional area, the blood flow is going to decrease. So let's take a few examples. We can imagine, let's say that this is the aorta, for example. It's not too important what this is. It has a cross-sectional area of 2 centimeters, okay? And it has a blood flow, or the blood flow through everything here is 200, okay? So we take 200, divide it by 2. 2 is the cross-sectional area, 200 is the flow, and we get the velocity. The velocity is right here, which is 100 centimeters every second. Perfect. Now let's say we increase the cross-sectional area. Let's say this is the capillaries where we have a high cross-sectional area. We're going to take 200 divided by 10. Not divided by 10, sorry. Oh yeah, صح, we divide by 10, which is the cross-sectional area. Divided by 10, and we get the answer of 20 centimeters per second. But that's that. That's all you need to know. This is important for the capillaries because the lower flow of or the lower velocity of blood in the capillaries allows for proper exchange. Not just the total cross-sectional area helps in exchange, but also the slowing of the blood, because you need to give the blood enough time to exchange its nutrients. Okay, that's all you need to know from this part. Now here, these two graphs, I just explained them here. Where is it? This. It's the same exact thing. The only thing is different. That's different here is that the total surface area, you can see that it increases all the way in the capillaries. But like we said before, there's total cross-sectional area. It's the highest in the capillaries. Okay, it decreases once we leave the capillaries. That's it. So yeah, Dr. Abdul Jabbar wrote all of this in the slides, but it's not really related to the graph, but we'll go through it right now. Small arteries and arterioles are resistant vessels. They're the main site of peripheral resistance. But we can look at this graph again. This is where we could say the small arteries start. Okay, look how the resistance, by the way, this is the peripheral resistance. Okay, this is the resistance. The resistance peaks at the arterioles and the small arteries. Okay. So resistance also here, same. So resistance also here, the same as the other graph. Velocity and resistance. Yeah. Velocity is right here. Okay, it's fastest in. I'll go. How about I just go over it, Yanni? The velocity is here. It's the fastest in the aorta, and it decreases all the way in the capillaries, and it starts to increase a bit once it leaves the capillaries, because once again the capillaries have the total surface, the highest total surface area. And what else did you say? Resistance. Yeah, the resistance is almost the same. Here in the last graph that I showed you guys, it put the peak at only the arterioles. Over here, it starts to increase in the arteries, which is a bit more accurate to say, Yani. A lot of the resistance is in the arterioles, but some of the small arteries also play a role in resistance. Same as the last slide, but here they're put together. Yeah, exactly. They're put together into one. That's what's happening here. I can label it, Yani. This is systolic pressure, diastolic pressure. Exactly what we went through. They combine in the capillaries, so there's no more systolic and diastolic pressure in the capillaries from highest to lowest. This is the total surface area. This wasn't in the last graph. I don't think it was. So it peaks in the capillaries. This right here is velocity. Velocity goes from highest in the aorta to lowest in the capillaries. And then resistance. Resistance peaks at the arterioles, and there's a bit of resistance in the small arteries as well. So I hope that makes sense. But another thing to know, it has nothing to do with the graph, al fikra. Why do systolic and diastolic merge in capillaries? From what I know, is that because the capillaries don't have, okay, the systolic and diastolic blood pressures are basically a result of the aorta distending, the arteries distending, and then recoiling back, okay? So when it distends, that's systolic blood pressure. Diastolic blood pressure is when it recoils, okay? When you get to the capillaries, they don't have that anymore. The capillaries don't have the ability to distend and recoil. The capillaries don't have that. But that's why it merges in the capillaries. Does that make sense? Okay. So veins are blood reservoirs. We went over this. It has a high compliance. Oh, my pen stopped working. Okay, there we go. Has a high compliance. Like we said multiple times, it can take blood, distend, and it can keep that blood. That's it. But veins can hold a lot of extra blood without causing a big increase in pressure. But imagine you're putting blood into a vein and it distends. Okay, so the pressure, there's no pressure. There's no pressure being caused because of the blood. It's just holding this blood, and there's not a lot of pressure. Okay, that's it. That's why veins, we call them reservoirs, blood reservoirs. They hold, remember, 60% of the blood in the cardiovascular system. Although it's not important to know this number, but you should know that it holds the majority of the blood in the cardiovascular system. Okay, we finally got to a checkpoint. It actually took way more time than I expected. Here, we're like almost done with hemodynamics 1. But we're just gonna go through like 2 quick questions. Here at SF. Also, if you guys have any questions to ask here, you can go ahead. So we're just gonna start off. Here at SF, the first question is huge. Does anyone want to read it, or should I read it, Yani? Okay, I'm assuming there's no volunteers. If you have an answer, just say it in the chat. I'm gonna read. Although I can't really see the question that well because Zoom is covering half my screen. But a 55-year-old male decides to go on, I'm assuming an exercise program. Uh, he starts an intense exercise program. During the run, he experiences increasing shortness of breath and a sensation of palpitations, but continues running. Upon finishing, he feels fatigued but not in pain. His heart rate is 120 beats per minute. His stroke volume is measured at 80 milliliters per minute. His cardiac output is significantly elevated from baseline. Initial physical exam reveals a blood pressure of 155 over 90 millimeters mercury, with cool, slightly moist skin. An ECG is performed, showing sinus tachycardia, but no signs of ischemia or arrhythmia. Lab results show normal troponin levels, and there are no signs of acute heart failure. You suspect the increased cardiac output is related to normal physiological response to exercise. Which of the following correctly explains how sympathetic output alters blood distribution during exercise? Yes, often I should have deleted this question. But everything here is not important. The only important part is this last sentence. Which of the following correctly explains how sympathetic output alters blood distribution? وصح عليكم, I do believe the answer is B. Let's find out. It is B. Can anyone explain why it's B? Beta causes vasodilation, so more flow. We need to increase blood flow to skeletal muscles to use them. Exactly, صح. Exactly. So remember that beta adrenergic receptors, specifically beta 2, okay? We send sympathetic stimulation to it to cause vasodilation in the heart and skeletal muscles, okay? Let's just quickly go over the other options to cancel them out. Alpha adrenergic receptors in arterioles supplying skeletal muscles leads to vasoconstriction. أولاً, vasoconstriction is not what we need to the skeletal muscles. ثانياً, I don't believe they have alpha adrenergic receptors. I'm low-key not sure, but anyways, we don't need vasoconstriction there. We need vasodilation to the heart and skeletal muscles, okay? Alpha adrenergic receptors causing vasodilation. Alpha adrenergic does not cause vasodilation. If we activate alpha adrenergic, we're going to get vasoconstriction, specifically alpha 1, okay? And decreased sympathetic output to the muscles and skin leads to vasoconstriction. This is also wrong. If we take the alpha 1 receptor and decrease the sympathetic stimulation to it, we're going to get vasodilation. But we can also cancel this out. But good job, guys. Last question before we move on. This one's way smaller. I'm going to read it out. So, a 65-year-old male with a history of hypertension presents to the clinic for evaluation of a pulsatile mass in his abdomen. He reports no pain, but imaging reveals an abdominal aortic aneurysm measuring 5 centimeters in diameter. You explain that the aneurysm is at risk of rupture due to increasing wall tension. Which of the following best explains why this aneurysm is likely to rupture according to Laplace's law? Can you guys answer? Okay. See one answer. Okay, two answers is good enough. صح, exactly. I believe the answer is C. Wait. The answer is C. Okay. So, like we said before, the increasing radius of an aneurysm, let's just look at the equation again. Tension is equal to the PI minus PO times radius. Like we said, in an aneurysm, the radius increases. But because of that, we're going to have more tension. So that's why the answer is C. Okay. Yes, we're running a bit like this has gone for a while, so I won't go over the other answers. But I hope this makes sense, Aaron. Can you explain D? Oh, D. Okay, sure. The decreasing pressure within the aneurysm decreases wall tension, reducing the risk of rupture. So basically what this is saying, and no, PI minus PO times radius, it's basically saying that if we decrease the pressure over here, we're going to decrease wall tension, which is correct, على فكرة. When we decrease the pressure, the tension also decreases. But in the context of an aneurysm, this doesn't happen. The pressure doesn't decrease at all. But that's why this is wrong. But if we did decrease the pressure, the tension would decrease, okay? But in the mechanism of an aneurysm, the pressure doesn't decrease أصلا. It's more about the increasing radius. Yeah, aneurysm isn't really related to the pressure. If you guys remember, Yeah, when we talked about aneurysm is when we have a weakening of the blood vessel wall. But you already have a normal pressure here. The normal pressure is growing through here, but because there's a weakening of the blood vessel wall, that pressure that the aorta or artery used to think was normal is now too much for it to handle. It kind of bulges out. And in the progression of an aneurysm, it's not an increase in pressure causing it to grow out more and burst. It's because of the increase in radius. Okay, but initially it's because it can't withstand the pressure because of a weakening in the blood vessel wall. But in the progression of it, it's all about the what's it called, the relationship between radius and tension. But that's why the answer is C. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the rest of hemodynamics one. It's kind of crazy how we didn't finish it. I hope we can speed up a bit, Yani. So blood flows from high pressure to low pressure. Okay, we said this a lot of times. What's it called? Look here, this is the aorta. And we have it's flowing from high pressure to low pressure. It's as simple as that, okay? And we can calculate this pressure gradient by taking the pressure at the start minus the pressure at the end, okay? So we can take the pressure here, minus it by the pressure at the right atrium to find out the pressure gradient. But then we have one problem. There's systolic blood pressure, which is 120, and there's diastolic blood pressure, which is 80. So what do we do here? And what do we put at the start? Well, what we can do is we can get something called the mean arterial pressure. Okay. And we're going to calculate that right now. But the mean arterial pressure is basically just the average between the systolic and the diastolic. It's a bit more complicated than adding the two together and dividing it by 2. We have an equation for this. So the MAP is equal to diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of pulse pressure. So the pulse pressure is systolic blood pressure minus diastolic blood pressure. The reason we have this equation and the reason it looks like this is because the heart spends more time in diastole than it does in systole, okay? But it's not too important to know why this equation came about, but then you should just memorize that the mean arterial pressure is equal to diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of the pulse pressure, okay? And we're going to practice that right now. What I want you guys to do right now is take the pressure, the mean arterial pressure in the arteries, for example, minus the pressure in the right atrium, okay? That's how we get the pressure gradient of the systemic circulation. Can anyone calculate that for me real quick? Okay. Hey, by the way, if you guys forgot the mean arterial pressure equation, I can write it down for you guys, Yanni. Okay. Someone just asked me what's 120 over 80 here. 120 over 80 is the systolic blood pressure in the or no, not sorry. This is systolic. Oh, this is systolic over diastolic blood pressure. Okay, that's what 120 over 80 is here. So 120 over here is systolic blood pressure. 80 is diastolic blood pressure. Does that make sense? And then this is in the aorta method, for example. By then we have the what's it called? The right atrial pressure, which is 2. So what we want to do here is take the mean arterial pressure and minus it by the pressure at the end, which is the right atrium. If you guys can't figure out how to calculate it, like just tell me and I'll calculate it right now, Yanni. But if you guys can figure it out on your own, it'd be amazing. Okay, perfect. It is. Oh wait. Oh wait. Okay, you're close. Here's the thing: the mean arterial pressure is 93, but then you have to minus it with the right atrial pressure. Okay. But that's how you get a pressure gradient of 91 actually. So I'll just quickly go over it, Yani. You're on the right track. What's it called? So the mean arterial pressure, like we said, is equal to diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of the pulse pressure. Pulse pressure is systolic minus diastolic. 120 over minus 80. What's it called? Let's replace this with 80 right here. 1/3. Okay, by the way, 120 minus 80 is 40. But 1/3 of 40 is just 13.3. So we're gonna get 13.3. Here, صراحة, you can round it down to 13, and you're gonna get a mean arterial pressure of 93. صح. Now that we have the mean arterial pressure, what we want to do is calculate the pressure gradient. So the pressure gradient from the aorta to the right atrium is just going to be the pressure at the start, which is the mean arterial pressure, okay, which is 93. And then we're going to minus it by 2. Then we're going to get the answer of 91, okay? So you're completely right. You got the mean arterial pressure. So now that we have that, can you guys calculate the one for the pulmonary circulation, which is just this minus this? Well, if you guys take too long, I'll just show you guys the answer, and it's fun. Okay. Someone gave me the answer of 4. Let's find out if you're correct. صح, exactly. So what we did here is we took, this one might be a bit harder, or not harder, but the math. So you're going to take, what was it? 8. 8 plus 1/3 of 25 minus 8. Saraha, I have no idea what that is. So I'm just going to do it on my phone right now. Calculator. 25 minus 8 divided by 3. Okay, so you're going to get 5.6. 5.6, just round it up to 6, and you're going to get 8 plus 6. So your mean arterial pressure in this case is 14. Okay, that's your MAP, or your mean arterial pressure. So then you take the mean arterial pressure, which is 14, and minus it by 10, and you get an answer of 4. But that's how you calculate the pressure gradient. Pulse pressure is systolic minus diastolic. Bizlapt, yes, pulse pressure is systolic minus diastolic. Let's go back to the equation. Right. Okay. Yeah. So pulse pressure, systolic blood pressure minus diastolic blood pressure. So that's what pulse pressure is. I hope that makes sense. So now that we've calculated the pressure gradient, okay, we can now plug it into this equation. Okay. This equation is giving us resistance. Okay. So now we can find out what the resistance to flow is. Okay. So resistance is equal to the pressure gradient divided by the flow. Okay. Now let's use the pressure gradients we just got from our last slide. Okay. So we have this, what's it called? The systemic circulation was 91 and the pulmonary circulation was 4. Okay. So we're going to put that over here. Okay. So for systemic vascular resistance, we're going to have 91 in the pressure gradient. Pulmonary vascular resistance, we're going to have 4. And then we divided it by cardiac output. Okay. Cardiac output is basically the flow. Remember how I told you guys that flow is basically, what's it called? Flow is the amount of blood that passes a point every minute. So not stroke volume, sorry. Cardiac output is basically the same thing. So when we say we have a cardiac output of 5 liters per minute, that means, and at any point, like let's say after in the aorta, 5 liters per minute are flowing every minute, or 5 liters are flowing every minute, okay? So that's the flow in this case. Very quickly, just with your eyes, which one has a higher resistance? Cardiac output is flow? Yeah, in this case, cardiac output is flow. Yani flow can be anything. Flow is just like in general, but in the cardiovascular system, when we say flow, we can say cardiac output because what's it called? Like I have to go all the way back to the beginning, right? If we look here at the what's it called, the systemic circulation, the flow going to all these arterioles is, let's say, 5 liters per minute. It's the cardiac output. Okay, so in this case, the cardiac output is the flow. Well, the flow is just what's it called? The amount of blood that passes a point in a specific period of time. Okay. But Can I repeat the question? Yeah, I kind of gave the answer by accident. This which one here has a higher systemic sorry, which one here has a higher resistance? The systemic or the pulmonary vascular resistance? Which one looks bigger? Yeah. Systemic, exactly. So what Abdul Jabbar wanted you guys to know, he didn't really explain why, but the systemic vascular resistance is way higher than the pulmonary vascular resistance. Now, the reason why this is important is because in the systemic vascular or the systemic system, we want to regulate the blood flow to specific organs. Okay, let's say the gastrointestinal system. Okay, we want to either decrease or increase the flow to that area. We want to change a bunch of things in the systemic circulation. But in the pulmonary circulation, we just want the blood to go to the lungs. Okay, we don't want to give resistance to the blood going to the lungs. Otherwise, that would cause problems in the reoxygenation of blood. So basically, it's not too important to know this, but the pulmonary vascular resistance is way lower than the systemic vascular resistance, because in the systemic vascular resistance, or sorry, the systemic circulation, we're constantly vasoconstricting, vasodilating all the different arterioles that go to different places in the body. Okay, I hope that makes sense. But you guys, wait, let me see what's the next slide. Okay, yeah. So we know that resistance is equal to the pressure gradient divided by the flow. There's another equation which also gives us resistance. So resistance is equal to 8 times this weird looking n. The weird looking n is viscosity, okay? Times L. L stands for length of the blood vessel, divided by pi times r to the power of 4, okay? So very quickly, if I increase the viscosity of the blood, what happens to the, what happens to the resistance? Increase, بالضبط. The resistance, if I increase the blood flow, if I increase the viscosity, the resistance is going to increase. Okay. What about if I increase the radius? Okay. If I increase the radius of a blood vessel, what happens to the resistance? Decrease. Okay, perfect. It decreases. Okay. So something very important to know about radius is that it's to the power of 4. What does this mean? This means that a small change in the radius can have huge implications on the resistance of the blood vessel. Yes, بالضبط, more effect. Okay. So let's quickly go through the text. If the blood becomes more thicker, as in the blood's more viscous, you're going to have more resistance. The longer the blood vessel, here the thing is, the length of blood vessels usually doesn't change. But if you're comparing two different blood vessels and one was longer, it would have more resistance. Okay. And if radius gets smaller, the resistance would increase. Okay. And dramatically, by the way, because it's to the 4th power. And I'll show you guys this in a second. Okay. So look at this. We have two vessels, for example, one of them with a radius of 1 and one of them with a radius of 2. Okay. So now I'm going to switch to the blackboard and show you guys how big of a change this can cause. Yani. So we have blood vessel 1. So let's say the resistance of blood vessel 1 is going to be equal to 8 times the weird looking n times L, which is viscosity times length, divided by pi. And remember, the resistance was 1 to the power of 4. Okay. So 1 to the power of 4 is just 1. For the resistance here is just R. Khas, we could say that, yani. Okay. But in the case of blood vessel 2, so resistance of blood vessel 2, we use the same equation. But in this case, it's 2 to the power of 4. Can anyone quickly tell me what 2 to the power of 4 is? 16, exactly. So over here we get 16, okay? So look at this. The radius is now being divided by 16 instead of 1. Over here it was being divided by 1, which we don't write down, yani, but it would look like this, R divided by 1. So over here, the resistance of blood vessel 2 is R divided by 16, okay? So look at this. Just by doubling the, the size of the blood vessel, the resistance has decreased by 16 times. It's divided by 16 now. But we can see that right here. The flow has increased by 16 times, okay? But that's that. But small changes in the blood vessel can cause, or the blood vessel radius can cause huge changes in the resistance and the flow in general, yeah. I hope that makes sense. I can give another example of like changing the radius if you guys want. Well, come on, there's a practice question on this later, I think. I hope this makes sense to everyone. For like I said here, small changes in radius. Wait, it's okay. We got it. Khas, okay. Small changes in radius has a large effect on resistance to blood flow. Okay. So we take our resistance equation. Remember the equation we had before, which is resistance equals to pressure gradient divided by flow. What we can do is we can take this F over here, multiply it by resistance, okay, to make this, okay? Well, I'm stupid. Oh, okay, yeah, sorry. So once we multiply it, we have F times R equals to the pressure gradient, okay? And then we can move the resistance over here and divide it, okay? So that's how we get this. Flow equals to the pressure gradient divided by the resistance, okay? But what we can do now with this equation that we have is we can separate the pressure gradient and the resistance. So now we'll get flow equals to the pressure gradient times 1 over R, okay? Does anyone know what like 1 over R means? Like, what does that mean for us? Yeah, exactly. R is in the denominator, okay? Khalas, I'll explain them. Since R is in the denominator, what this means is that we have the inverse of R, basically, which is resistance. We have the inverse, okay? So a very quick example, and I can show you guys. And let's say we have X, okay? X is equal to 3 over 5, okay? Now, if we take 1 over X, it's going to be equal to the reciprocal of 3 over 5. The reciprocal just means we switch these around. So now 1 over X becomes 5 over 3, okay? So now we can apply this to resistance, okay? So remember, and we took the equation and got 1 over R. So what we're going to do here is take this equation, remember this, and we're going to flip these values around, okay? And when we add it to the equation, we get this, okay? Look, it's the exact same resistance equation as before, but it's flipped around. The old resistance equation was 8NL divided by pi radius to the power of 4. So now we just flipped it around. That's it, because it was 1 over R. That's it. So now we have this new equation. Wait, what does flipping it do? Here, the only reason we flipped it was because, and earlier, it became 1 over R, okay? Now that it's flipped and we add it to the equation, we can see what affects the flow, okay? Much easier. That's it. But now, for example, we can say that when we increase the radius, what happens to the flow? Yes, exactly. So it was to the power of -1. That's basically what it was, okay? Yeah, بالضبط. So when we increase the radius of the tube, the flow increases, okay? So now this equation allows us to see what affects flow easier. So if we decrease the pressure gradient, for example, the flow would decrease. If we played around with the viscosity, if we increase the viscosity, the flow would decrease, okay? So I hope this makes sense. Here, this is just an equation we derived from adding two equations together, basically. We took this original equation and we added, where is it? Where did it go? And we added this equation to it. And this allows us to easier see what affects flow. That's it. And we can use this equation to calculate a bunch of stuff. So now we can we can see easier that the viscosity of blood flow. Oh, wait. Okay. If we change the viscosity of blood flow, we change the flow akid. Okay. So let's say we have changes in hematocrit, like anemia. We have decreased viscosity. Okay. The flow is going to increase because of that. Okay. The length of the blood vessel rarely changes. I said this before. But مثلا, if we had a blood vessel that for some reason got longer or something, or we were comparing between two blood vessels and one of them got longer, or one of them is longer, the flow would be lower in the blood vessel that's longer. Okay. So still, by looking at this equation, we can see that radius has the biggest effect, okay, because it's to the power of 4. So the radius of blood vessels, the radius of the blood vessel can be changed by smooth muscle tone. Remember the arterioles from earlier, vasoconstriction, vasodilation? Through this mechanism, in anemia, we have decreased flow. In anemia, we have, in anemia, we have decreased hematocrit. We have increased flow because there's less red blood cells. So the viscosity decreases and the flow is going to increase. Okay? That's what happens in anemia. Okay. So remember the arterioles, we vasoconstricted them, we vasodilated them. This is what we're changing here. We're just changing the radius of the blood vessel. And the body does this because it's what affects the blood flow the most. Okay? That's it. But I hope this all makes sense, Yani. So right now we're just going to move on to the last concept of hemodynamics 1, which is resistance. Okay? There's two types of resistances. We have resistance in series, which is just flow going through all these blood vessels at once. Each compartment has a different resistance. Okay, one has 5, one has 25, one has 100. And the way we calculate the total resistance of all this is just by adding them together. But can someone quickly add them together and give me the number? 130. بالضبط. خلاص. It's that simple. That's resistance in series. Yeah, exactly. Resistance in series. Okay, my thing is not working. Okay, there we go. We get an answer of 130. Something else we can notice about the total resistance is that the 130 is higher than all of these individual resistances. Okay, so when we have resistance in series, the R total, which is the total resistance, it's greater than the greatest individual resistance. So what this means is, wait, okay, so what this means is basically, and no, مثلا the greatest individual resistance here is 100. Okay, but the total is 130. 130 is way bigger than 100. Basically, the resistance, the total resistance is always going to be higher, okay, no matter what. Okay, no matter how big any individual resistance is, the total is going to always be higher than it, okay? I hope that concept makes sense, because now we're going to move on to resistance in parallel, okay? Now, the resistance in parallel is a bit more tricky to calculate, but I know it's still easy, Annie. This is parallel flow, okay? The flow is going to these different compartments, each with their different resistances, okay? And this is how you calculate the total resistance. 1 over the total resistance is equal to 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2 plus 1 over R3. And this can keep going on, okay? It can become plus 1 over R4, depending on how many vessels we have in parallel. But right now we have 3 vessels, okay? Each one has a resistance of 15. Can someone calculate the total resistance for me? Five. Exactly. بالضبط. Okay. 5. The resistance is 5. Okay, it's very simple calculation. And we just get 1 over R total, okay, is equal to 1 over 15 plus 1 over 15 plus 1 over 15, okay? And as a result of this, by adding them all together, let me delete all this, we get 3 over 15. Now look at the total resistance. This is reciprocal, right? I explained this to you guys before. And then we have 1 over R total. So to get the R total, we just flip these guys around. It's as simple as this. So we do 15 divided by 3. And 15 divided by 3 is just 5. That's how we get the total resistance. Now, let's add another blood vessel. Let's imagine I add another blood vessel. Okay, and it also has a resistance of 15. But can someone also calculate the resistance here? It's total here, not more than the individual ones. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I was actually about to explain that. And 15 divided by 4, correct? That's the answer. Yeah, I was just about to explain that. And the individual resistance is always going to be higher than the total resistance when we have parallel. So look how the resistance is 5. It's way less than 15. So the total resistance is always going to be less than the greatest individual resistance method. Okay? And look how when we add another vessel with a resistance of 15, it becomes 3.75. 3.75 is just 4 divided by 15. Well, 15 divided by 4, sorry. Okay? It's the same way we solved it earlier, but then we added another blood vessel. Okay? What we can derive from this as well is that the more vessels we have in parallel, the lower the total resistance. But look how we added another blood vessel and the resistance dropped. Okay? So the more blood vessels we add in parallel, the lower the total resistance is going to be. But in series, the more blood vessels we add with more resistance, the more resistance there's going to be. Okay? I hope that makes sense. Now we're going to compare between them. We have parallel versus series. This is parallel right here. And this is series. So in parallel, the total resistance is always going to be less than the resistance of any of the individual arteries. So, يعني مثلا, if we went back here and we added a blood vessel, but the resistance instead of 15, it was 1, we're going to get an answer that's less than 1. Okay? You guys can test that out if you want, but I tried it out. So, the total resistance is always going to be less than any individual artery, the resistance of any individual artery. Okay? And what we said here is that each artery in parallel receives a part of the total blood flow. I explained this before, but when we, I don't want to do that. When we have parallel flow, okay, now imagine that this is the blood vessels again, yani. Okay. Now let's imagine that this is the aorta, and we have a cardiac output of 5 liters going through it. And this is parallel circulation, okay? This is a bunch of organs, yani. Instead of 5 liters going through all of the compartments, each one is only going to get a bit of the cardiac output. So, مثلا, this guy is going to get 2 liters. This guy will get 1.5 liters. This guy will also get 1.5 liters, for example. So each parallel vessel will get a different amount of the flow or the cardiac output, okay? So that's what this means, okay? Now we move on to the series. Like we said before, the total resistance is always greater than the greatest individual resistance, okay? So like the example way back here, with 100, the total resistance is always going to be higher. But even if the resistance here was 1,000, we're just going to get 1,030. But the total resistance is always going to be higher, okay? Now, in a series, what's it called? The blood vessels all receive the same total blood flow. So if we go back to this again, let's say the cardiac output was 5 liters. This was a series. The 5 liters goes through all of these, okay? It's not split, yani. Not one gets 3 liters, another one gets 1 liter, another one gets 1 liter. They all get the same amount of blood flow, okay? But I hope that makes sense. So we said this a lot of times before. I hope it's stuck in your mind now. Arterioles are resistant vessels in the circulation. But why not capillaries? Can anyone answer that? Does anyone know why we don't use capillaries? For resistance, yani? And think about what we just talked about like a second ago. More divisions, exactly. Here, capillaries have millions and millions of capillaries, okay? In parallel, by the way, they're all in parallel. But if we go back to this method, notice how when we added another vessel in parallel, the resistance decreased. نفس الشيء. In the capillaries, we have millions of capillaries. The total resistance is going to be extremely low, but they're basically useless when it comes to resistance. Arterioles, on the other hand, there's not millions of arterioles. They can still have a good amount of resistance, and that's why we use them as resistant vessels. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, alhamdulillah, we just finished with checkpoint, or no, we just finished with hemodynamics 1. Hemodynamics 2, inshallah, is going to be way easier, or like way shorter. What's it called? We're going to do some questions, and then if you guys want, we'll take a break, like a 5-minute break, because I think you guys are getting tired, and I'm also getting tired of it. So let's do some quick questions. Oh, this one's tough. I'm going to read it out for you guys, and you guys can answer it while I'm reading, and just give me the answer. In a laboratory experiment, a blood vessel is perfused with a saline at a constant flow rate. The driving pressure along the vessel is 32 millimeters mercury. So we can underline this. After the application of a vasodilator, the vessel radius doubles. Hello. Assuming all other hemodynamic parameters are constant, what new driving pressure in millimeters mercury is required to keep the flow rate constant? So can anyone answer this for me? D, let me think. No, it's not D. It's not D. A, yes, okay. I got an A here. Okay. The answer is A. So I'll explain why it's A. I think you were on the right track with D, but then you missed maybe a step, I think. We'll see right now. Basically, let's write down what we know. The pressure gradient is 32. 32 millimeters mercury, okay? And what's it called? The vessel radius, okay, let's say R1, before it doubled, let's just say it was 1, okay? To keep things simple. Now, the vessel radius after we vasodilate it, let's call it radius 2, it doubled, so it became 2, okay? So we can plug it into the equation, which is literally just, we said that flow Let me make a divider here. We said that flow is equal to the pressure gradient times, what's called pi times r to the power of 4 divided by 8 viscosity times length. Okay. Now let's look at the what's called the flow of the vessel before it vasodilated. It's going to be a radius of 1. So 1 over 4. And 1 over 1 to the power of 4, sorry, is just 1. Okay. So the flow is just 1. Let's say the flow is 1f, and f, okay? But now, radius 2, we just doubled, okay? So it became 2, okay? 2 to the power of 4. Okay. So what's it called? This becomes 16, okay? And something I completely forgot to mention, and the flow here is 32, okay? So actually, I'm so sorry, wait. So for vessel 1, remember the radius was 1, okay? So it's 1, because 1 to the power of 4 is 1. So 1 times 32 is 32. So the flow before it vasodilates is 32F, okay? So 32F, we're just going to write it here, okay? Another divider. 32F for the blood vessel before it vasodilates, okay? Now, what we want to do is after it vasodilates, we want to keep it at 32F, okay? So, but we have a problem here. Once we change the vessel radius to 2, okay, to the power of 4, sorry, we have 16 over here. 16 multiplied by 32 is going to give you a huge number. But what we want to do is we want to change this number so that we get 32 when we multiply them. So the answer is 2. Why? Because when we multiply 2 times 16, so if we change the driving pressure here to 2, it would be 2 times 16, and we'd still get 32F. Does that make sense? Which is related to higher radius, less pressure. What do you mean by that? Related to higher radius, less pressure? Radius, less pressure. Yeah, still look. I know what's it called? It is kind of related to that. Yeah, it is kind of related to that concept. Look, when we increase the radius, if we want to keep the flow constant, the pressure had to decrease. But the pressure went from 16 to sorry, not 16. It went from 32 down to 2 just to keep the flow constant. But in a way, it is kind of related to that. But I hope that makes sense, Ian. If that makes sense, we'll move on to the next question. By the way, I heard you guys got this on your mock, so I changed up the values a little. But right here, we have just a series circuit, technically, combined with a parallel circuit, okay? And the pressure at point A is 80. The pressure at point D is 31, okay? So it wants you to just calculate the flow, okay? But if you guys can just do that quickly for me, and we'll see if you guys can get it right here. 6 is the answer. 6. I look, you also have to calculate it again. Okay, right. Let's just calculate it by drawing. Okay. I don't think the answer is 6. I don't think it is. I believe the answer. Well, let's calculate it right now. Why not? Yeah, we have resistance of 1. We have the first resistance, it's 3. Wait, let's see. Chat. Sorry, 6 is the resistance. 6 is the resistance? Okay. So now calculate the flow, if that's what the resistance is, if that's what you think it is, Ian. How can we calculate both parallel and series together? Okay. Yeah, I'll explain this question from scratch, and basically, when you have this, okay, what you're going to do is consider this as a series circuit. So you're going to consider this as one series. You're going to calculate the parallel resistance of these together, and then you're going to add it with this. So you're going to do this. Wait, you're going to take this plus the parallel resistance of this plus this. But this is basically one big series circuit, but I know you added parallel resistance to it. And you just calculate the parallel resistance here, which we're going to do right now. I'll show you guys how to do that. And then you add it to the rest. But I'll just answer the question for you guys right now. So basically, let's start with the flow, not the flow, sorry, the pressure. The pressure gradient is just going to be 80 minus 31. Okay. I have no idea what that is. I think it's 49 actually. Is it 49? 49. We'll find out if you're correct. Saha, I don't even remember the answer to this. 49. So the pressure gradient is 49. Okay. Now we want to calculate the resistance. First, let's start off with calculating the parallel resistance of this. Okay. What we're going to do is use the equation, if you guys remember, the total resistance is equal to 1 over 5 plus 1 over 10 plus 1 over 5. Okay. Now this will come up to, if you put in you guys will have a calculator in the exam, so you guys don't have to do this stuff, yani. So what you're going to end up with is 5 over 10. Okay. You're going to get 5 over 10. And we just take the reciprocal of this, remember? Because this is 1 over total resistance, we take the reciprocal of this. We get 10 over 5. 10 over 5 is just 2. But we got the resistance here. The resistance here is 2. What's it called? Now we have this resistance here and this resistance here. So what we're just going to do is we're going to add it together. 3 plus 2 plus 1. You're right, yeah, Ahmed. The resistance is 6. What you're going to do is do 49 divided by 6. And 49 divided by 6 gives you an answer of 8.1666667. Okay? Does this make sense? Can you repeat the last part? When we add the resistance together, ولا كيف? Yeah, basically, what we did is we took. Oh wait, let me check chats. What did we add 2 to 3 to 1? Okay, yeah. So basically, what we did here, we considered this as a series circuit. Okay, because what's it called? Look at this flow. Okay, my pen isn't working. Okay, the flow goes through all of these, and yes, it divides here, but then it eventually goes back to here. Okay, so we can kind of consider this as a series circuit. When we add all of the things together, because the flow goes from point A to D, right? So the flow goes through all of this. So what we can just do is calculate the parallel resistance here, which ends up to be 2. Then we can add it with 3 and 1, because all of this flow, 100% of it is reaching the end here. 100% of the flow is going all the way to D. We can literally just consider this as a series, and we say that the total resistance here is 2. It's the same thing as if we were saying, and we have this. It's the same thing. A resistance of 3, a resistance of 2, it's a resistance of 1. Okay. Same exact thing. Like, look how this is a series circuit. We can just add them together. We can do the same thing here. Okay. Did we add both R for flow? What do you mean by that? The final equation to add flow? Oh, okay. The equation to find flow, we just used the original one, the old one, the very old one, which was what's it called? Sorry, I didn't mention it. And we just went back to the old one, which is just flow, it's pressure gradient divided by resistance. We don't need to go to the new one that we made, because the new one has too much variables like length and radius and all that stupid stuff. But we just use this very simple equation. We calculate the resistance across this. My pen stopped working again. 3, 2, 1. We got a resistance of 6 and divided it by the pressure gradient, which was 49. And we got our answer, which is 8.1666667. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. Okay, alhamdulillah, we're done with hemodynamics 1. Do you guys want to take like a 5-minute break before I start hemodynamics 2, or do you guys just want me to continue? Okay, so far one person's asking for a break. Khalas, then we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back. Right. Okay, welcome back. We're back at hemodynamics 2. Inshallah, hemodynamics 2 is going to be way shorter if I hear the objectives. But let's go over hemodynamics 2, inshallah. So another equation. This equation is explaining compliance. Remember how I was talking for like the past 2 hours about how the veins have a huge amount of compliance and what's it called? Because of the compliance, they can hold a lot of blood, right? This is that equation, okay? So capacitance or compliance is equal to volume divided by pressure, okay? So let's say in the veins, we have a lot of pressure, right? In the veins, we also have, no, sorry. In the veins, we have a lot of volume, صح? And in the veins, we also have a low amount of pressure, like relatively, right? But this would lead to a high amount of compliance. But in the arterioles, not the arterioles, the arteries method, they hold like a fine amount of volume. I don't think it's like technically compared to the veins, it's less. So compared to the veins, they have less volume, but they also have the highest pressure. Like think of the aorta, for example, has 120 systolic pressure and 80 diastolic pressure. That's a huge amount of pressure. So because of that, they have less compliance. Okay. Well, inshallah, there's a graph in the next slide which explains it better. But compliance is higher in veins than arteries. That's what we just explained. Okay. There's more blood volume in the veins than arteries. Okay. Well, come on, in the veins, there's less pressure. And in the arteries, there's increased pressure. Okay. So what we can do is we can actually, if the heart wants more blood, we can increase the venous tone. We can vasoconstrict the veins and move blood from the veins to the arteries. Not the arteries. This should be like the heart, the right atrium method. Okay. So we can increase the venous tone and push the blood all the way back to the right atrium by changing the compliance of the vein because it's holding so much. It's basically a blood reservoir. Okay. So at any time, we can constrict the veins and cause that blood reservoir to go back up. Okay. I hope that makes sense. Capacitance of the arteries decreases with age. Okay, capacitance is compliance, like I said. Wait, another. What's venous tone? Venous tone is basically what's it called? The muscles, basically. Are they constricted? Are they not constricted? So when we increase venous tone, we're constricting the smooth muscle of the veins. When we do that, they constrict. Remember how they're relaxed like this? Like they're relaxed and they're holding a lot of volume. When we increase venous tone, we constrict them. We cause them to vasoconstrict. Okay, we cause them to like recoil back here, basically. But that's what's happening. I hope that makes sense. The capacitance or the compliance of our arteries decreases with age. So as we get older, the arteries get more stiff. Remember how the aorta distends when it gets blood and then it recoils back? As we get older, the distending of the aorta kind of gets like decreased because the compliance of the arteries is going to get lower with age. Okay. Yeah, this isn't too important to know, but it was written on the slides. Yeah, I have a, what's it called? I think I have a diagram of, yeah, later I'll show you how venous tone causes the blood to move forward. Wait, give me a second. Yeah, when we constrict the veins, the blood will move forward to the heart. And I'll show you guys like a diagram to make this make more sense, like in the upcoming few slides, Yani. Oh, so this is a graph, okay? This graph is showing you volume over pressure, okay? Now look at the veins. This is a vein and this is an artery, okay? Look at the veins, okay? When we have a, like, let's say a low pressure here, look at how much volume it can store. It can store a lot of volume, okay? But the artery, it can't hold that much volume. It just can't, okay? So that's why we say veins are more compliant, okay? Even at low pressures like this, they can hold a huge amount of blood, okay? Now, as you keep adding volume to the vein, look at how the graph changes. It first off, the volume increases. The pressure doesn't change much, but at some point, you get to a point where the vein starts to become less compliant. And no khalas, the vein can't hold any more blood, okay? The pressure starts increasing a lot as you add more volume. So the veins are compliant up to a degree. If you add too much volume or too much blood to the veins, the pressure is going to start increasing like crazy and they can't hold all this blood. Okay, arteries, on the other hand, they're not really that compliant at all. They're just, the more pressure you add, the volume change doesn't change that much. Okay, now here we have a bit of numbers. In veins, we have a compliance of 100 milliliters per millimeter mercury. Okay, what this means is that with every increase in pressure by 1 millimeter mercury, the veins can hold another 100 milliliters of blood. Okay, While in the arteries, it's 2. So that means in the arteries, with every increase in pressure, it can only hold another 2 milliliters of blood, okay? So that's why the veins hold a lot of the blood. That's why they have 60% of the cardiovascular system, the blood in the cardiovascular system, okay? So, like I said before, due to the high compliance of veins, even a small change in the peripheral venous pressure can cause a significant blood volume shift out into the peripheral venous pool. So, like even a small change in pressure, like when we increase the venous tone, for example, we can shift out a lot of blood back to the heart, okay? I'll show you guys a graph of what this looks like right now. So this is the vein, and this is its normal compliance, okay? Now, what happens when we constrict it? When we constrict it or increase the venous tone, the compliance graph changes, okay? The compliance graph is going to go down like this, okay? It's going to move to point C. Point C basically means, and when we constrict the veins, the pressure increases, command the volume decreases. Look how the volume went from point A to point C. The volume went down, okay? Where did this volume go? It went back up to the heart. Okay, that's what happens when we increase the tone. When we increase the tone, we decrease the compliance, okay? That's literally all there is to it. But there's 2 types of compliance. We have dynamic compliance, which is a result of us actively vasoconstricting the vessel or not vasoconstricting the vessel. And then we have static compliance, which is a result of stuff that we can't control, the body can't control. So age, like I said before, the vessels get less compliant as we age. That's just static. It doesn't change. We can't change it, okay? Arterial disease, method, and we have hardening of the blood vessel due to some kind of disease. That can also cause a decrease in compliance. This is also static, okay? Now, here's something that was mentioned in the slides, and I don't think it's important for you guys to know, but stiffness, okay, is the opposite of compliance, okay? And the equation for it is also just the reciprocal of compliance. So remember how compliance was volume over pressure? Stiffness is just the reverse. Pressure over volume. You're going to get stiffness. Stiffness just tells you how stiff an artery is. It's just the opposite of compliance. And I don't think he'd ever ask you guys about this, but it's good knowledge to know, okay? So I hope all of that makes sense. Now we're going to move on to a diagram of why increasing venous tone can push blood back to the heart. What's static and dynamic compliance? Okay. Static is something we can't change. It's compliance that our body can't control. Dynamic is something our body can control. Method, constriction of the veins, increasing the venous tone. That's something our body controls. Age, on the other hand, our body can't control our age. It can't just change the age changes the vessel compliance, and the body can't do anything about it. So as we continue to age, the compliance in our arteries decreases. That's normal, okay? And the body can't control that. As well as in arterial disease, where the blood vessel hardens, for example, when the blood vessel hardens, there's also going to be decreased compliance. And that's something the body can't control. So dynamic is something we can actively change. Static is something we can't change. So the compliance is this, it's that. That's static. But when it's dynamic, when we increase the tone, we decrease the tone, we're actively changing the compliance of the blood vessel. I hope that makes sense. Okay, perfect. So, like we said, veins act as a reservoir because they have high compliance, 10 to 25 times more compliant than arteries, okay? We can use this reservoir to increase venous return and increase cardiac output. So, let's say we want more blood going back to the heart. We want to increase the blood going back to the heart. We want to increase the venous return. What we're going to do is this. We're going to increase sympathetic activity to venous smooth muscle cells, okay? So we're going to send a bunch of signals through adrenergic receptors. What receptors do you guys think we're using? What receptor are we using when we increase sympathetic activity to the venous smooth muscle cells? Okay, yeah. I'm assuming you said alpha 1. Bizlap, alpha 1. We what's it called? We increase sympathetic activity through alpha 1 receptors to increase the venous tone. When we increase venous tone, what happens? Look at this. it went from being big like this, holding a bunch of blood, to constricted. Now it's constricted. The compliance has officially decreased. Okay. And remember, in veins, we have valves. The valves prevent backflow. Okay. So when this happens, the blood has no way to go except for back to the heart. And that way we increase venous return. And I think you guys have taken this in other lectures, maybe. When we increase the venous return, our cardiac output as a result will also increase. Okay. I hope that makes sense. Well, come on, this was on Abdul Jabbar slides. Same exact thing. We increase sympathetic activity through alpha-1 receptors. The smooth muscle contracts. We have an increase in venous tone. The increase in tone causes a decrease in venous compliance. And the blood reservoir, because of the valves preventing backflow, so these valves stop backflow, it has no option but to go back towards the heart. Okay. Because of that, we're going to increase venous return and increase cardiac output. Okay. So that's just a quick review. This was what he had in his slides. Okay. Now we're going to talk about what happens to our central venous pressure when we're lying down and when we're sitting down, or when we're lying down and when we're standing up. Okay. So when we're lying down, the blood in the veins tends to pool near the heart in the central venous compartment. If you guys remember from earlier, the central venous compartment is anything above the diaphragm. Okay. So the blood pools here, but don't get confused. And no, you guys might think that there's more pressure in here than the rest of the veins, but that's wrong. Okay. If you guys can see here, the peripheral venous compartment still has more pressure than the central venous pressure. Okay. Because, like I said before, blood flows from high pressure to low pressure. But if the pressure here was higher than the pressure here in the legs, the blood wouldn't flow back to the heart at all. And we'd die. We'd have no blood flow back to the heart. Okay. So the pressure in the legs or the peripheral venous compartment is still higher than the central venous pressure. Okay. But what happens basically is that the pressure gradient is low in this case. Okay. Because like I said, the pressure gradient is just the start minus the end. This is the end and this is the start. But since the pressure difference is less, you're gonna have less of a pressure gradient. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, I'm gonna go here and explain it more. But when we're standing up, the effect of gravity on the blood pulls it down in the legs. Okay, the veins in the legs. Okay, so now you can see here, the peripheral venous pressure, or the pressure in the legs, for example, is way higher than the pressure in the central venous compartment, or the veins above the diaphragm. Okay. So what's going to happen to the pressure gradient here? It's actually going to be way higher. I'm just going to add random numbers to this. Let's say over here that the pressure here was 10 and the pressure here was 8. Okay. This is, by the way, these are random numbers. The pressure gradient would be 10 minus 8, which is just 2. Okay. So over here, a bunch of blood has pooled in the legs. Okay. So now the pressure here has increased to 16. Okay. And the pressure in the central venous compartment has decreased to 2. Okay. So now the pressure gradient, 16 minus 2, has become 14. The pressure gradient back up to the heart has increased. Okay. And this is something that helps in bringing the blood back up to the heart. Okay. Now, in some people, they have trouble bringing when they stand up, they have trouble bringing this blood back up to the heart. And that results in something called orthostatic hypotension. Okay. And basically, not enough blood goes back to the heart. So the blood pumps less blood and it starts pumping less blood to the brain, for example. And you have stuff like fainting. Okay. So that's just important to know. But Here's an important example of static compliance. Okay. The blood vessel wall, or the arteries, for example, we went over this earlier, by the way, but the aorta can distend, okay, has some level of compliance. So when blood goes through it, the aorta distends when the heart contracts, but peripheral pressure is higher in the CVP in both cases. Yes, exactly. Let's go back. The peripheral venous compartment is always going to be higher because we want the pressure gradient to be positive. If the pressure gradient isn't positive, that means there's no flow going back to the heart, which would mean that, we're going to die, basically. But that's why the peripheral venous compartment is always going to be higher, okay, in both cases. And when we stand up, it starts to increase because gravity pulls it down to the legs. That's it. That's all you need to know from here. Okay, let's go back to here. the aorta distends during systole. So the heart pumps and the aorta distends, okay? Now during diastole, the aorta has the ability to recoil, okay? Because of the elastic fibers in its walls. So it recoils during diastole and it pushes the blood forward into the systemic circulation. This is known as the Wynn-Kessel effect, okay? It's important for maintaining blood flow when the heart is relaxed, okay? So right over here helps maintain coronary blood flow. It also helps maintain blood flow to all around the body, that's it. This is static compliant though. This is static compliance, okay? This is something our body can't control. But مثلا if we started to get older, okay, the compliance in these in the aorta and arteries, for example, would decrease. So this part over here where it distends, it's going to distend way less when we get older. And that's something the body just can't control, okay? So that's what you need to know about this part, Yang. That's why I repeated this concept in the context of static compliance, okay? This is the same exact concept, but this is the picture Abdul Jabbar used in his slides. If you guys want me to go over it, I can, but it's the same exact thing. Distension, then recoil, pushing the blood forward. That's it. But I'm just going to move on for now because I already explained it. So now that we know about compliance, and specifically arterial compliance, we can now estimate pulse pressure in another way. Remember how pulse pressure before was systolic blood pressure minus diastolic blood pressure? Now there's another way, okay? There's two things that determine the pulse pressure, okay? Pulse pressure is influenced by stroke volume, and it's also influenced by arterial compliance, okay? So we're going to go over these one by one, but if we increase the stroke volume, the pulse pressure is going to increase, okay? If we increase the arterial compliance, the pulse pressure is going to decrease because it's divided by arterial compliance, okay? And we have some examples here. So we have the normal pulse pressure, which is systolic minus diastolic, 120 minus 80. That's simply 40. Khalas? Simple as that. Now, let's imagine a condition, and this condition is known as arteriosclerosis, okay? Arteriosclerosis just means the arteries are hard. They've hardened, okay? When the arteries harden, the compliance decreases, okay? So the compliance has just decreased, okay, because of this arteriosclerosis. So arteriosclerosis, once again, is just hardening of the arterial walls, okay? So compliance has decreased. They can't distend as much as they used to before. So as a result of this, the pulse pressure is going to increase. And we can see it right here. We have a systolic blood pressure of 160 minus 80. That's going to give us a pulse pressure of 80. That's a huge increase in the pulse pressure. Now, what about aortic valve stenosis? In aortic valve stenosis, the aortic valve is constricted a lot to the point that the left ventricle has trouble pumping out all the blood from the, from the left ventricle. And the left ventricle struggles to put blood through the aortic valve, okay? So this means we're going to have a decrease in stroke volume, okay? Now, because of this, the pulse pressure decreases. So we can see here, and it goes from 100, or no, like it's 100 systolic minus 80, okay, diastolic. And in that way, we'll get a pulse pressure of 20, okay? But I hope this makes sense. This is how you can relate things. So the pulse pressure is determined by both stroke volume and arterial compliance, okay? So in the example of arteriosclerosis, we have decreased arterial compliance, causing an increase in pulse pressure. And in aortic valve stenosis, we have a decrease in stroke volume, causing a decrease in the pulse pressure. And it can go both ways, Yani. You can also increase stroke volume, you're going to increase pulse pressure. If you, for some reason, increase the compliance somehow, you're going to have a decreased pulse pressure. I hope that makes sense. Let me see the chat. Why do we have decreased stroke volume in aortic valve stenosis? Okay. I think you guys took this in another lecture, but basically imagine that this is the left ventricle right here, okay? Wow, this is a bad left ventricle. This is the left ventricle, okay? Just imagine it as the left ventricle, okay? Yeah, it has the job of pumping blood to the aorta, okay? And there's a valve between them, okay? We have the aortic valve. Now, the aortic valve is usually, it's the aortic valve. It closes after, what's it called? It closes after the blood goes through, and it's not very constricted. Yeah, basically, wait, how do I explain this? Okay, let me restart from the beginning. We have an aortic valve, okay? The left ventricle has to push through this aortic valve to get to the aorta, okay? Aorta. Now, in aortic valve stenosis, this aortic valve is way more like the gap is way more smaller, okay? It's extremely like it's closed. The aortic valve or the aortic valve is stenosed. It's constricted. So the left ventricle has a harder time pumping blood through the aortic valve. So that's why stroke volume is going to increase. مثلا, in a normal valve, we have 70 milliliters per beat. Okay? 70 milliliters. Okay? That's because the valve is so constricted, the left ventricle is not going to pump out all of the blood through this valve. So we could have a decrease from 70 to like, I don't know, I'm making up numbers here, but 30 milliliters per beat. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. So yeah, that's the basic concept. In aortic valve stenosis, we're going to have a decreased stroke volume. Decreased stroke volume is going to lead to a decreased pulse pressure. But that's all you guys need to know. Next, we're going to talk more about mean arterial pressure. So you guys remember the MAP, okay? MAP was, let's write it down right now. Diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of the pulse pressure, okay? There's another way to calculate the mean arterial pressure, okay? Look at this. Let me delete all of this. We have the cardiac output, okay? The cardiac output from the left ventricle, okay? It's going through here. It's going through the arteries, the aorta, for example. Consider this the aorta, okay? Like I said before, we can't send all of the stroke volume into the capillaries or else they're going to burst. So that's why we have some resistance from the arterioles, okay? The arterioles have resistance, and these are screws. These screws kind of show you how we can vasoconstrict them and vasodilate them, okay? So, like I said, we can't send all of the blood to the capillaries. What's going to happen? The aorta is going to distend, sorry. It's going to distend, okay? It's going to go outwards, okay? So, let's say we increase the resistance of the arterioles. Okay, when we increase the resistance of the arterioles, what happens to systemic vascular resistance is that it increases, okay? So as a result of that, you're going to have, let's constrict it. Let's say we actually did this, we constricted it. The blood coming from the heart is going to be like, it's going to, what's kefagul? The blood coming from the heart is going to have more trouble going through this thinner blood vessel or this constricted blood vessel. It's going to cause more pressure here. It's going to distend this way more. But if we increase the resistance by constricting this vessel or the arteriole, this is going to become way bigger. The aorta is going to distend way more. Okay. The same thing if we increase cardiac output. Okay. If we increase cardiac output, there's more blood gushing through the aortic valve, and it's going to cause this to distend way more, also causing an increase in mean arterial pressure. So that's it. That's the association you should make. Increased cardiac output will increase the pressure. I hope that makes sense. And if we increase the resistance, we'll also increase the mean arterial pressure. Something I just thought about. Okay, I didn't think about this before, but remember that equation from earlier, which was like resistance is equal to pressure gradient times flow. Here, in this case, we can reorganize this, okay, to become, we can multiply F times R, okay? So instead, we're going to get pressure gradient times R resistance is equal to, I'm tripping. Oh, no. Pressure gradient is equal to the flow times the resistance, okay? So the flow here is just the cardiac output. The resistance is systemic vascular resistance. But if we increase any of these, if we increase the resistance or if we increase the flow, the pressure gradient is going to increase as well. But that's actually really cool. I didn't notice this before, but this is an association with the equation we took before. You can associate it like this, and you can use this to remember it maybe. So I hope that makes sense. I hope this whole concept makes sense. We're going to move on. So let's say we're going to build on this concept, actually. Let's say I increased the tone of the arterioles. Okay. So I increased the systemic vascular resistance. Okay. What's going to happen to the mean arterial pressure? It's going to increase because of this equation. So we have baroreceptors, okay, all over our, not all over our body, but in the, for example, in the aorta. Okay, we have baroreceptors. These baroreceptors, they recognize increases or decreases in pressure, okay? So when we increase the systemic vascular resistance and we increase the mean arterial pressure, the baroreceptor is going to see this and it's going to be like, oh, we have a high blood pressure, okay? And what does the body want? It just wants to decrease this blood pressure. It wants to bring it back down to normal, okay? So You're gonna have firing of these baroreceptors. They're gonna send a bunch of stuff to the brain. Okay, I don't think you need to know all of this. It's just stuff in the brain. And it's gonna cause this to happen. So because we have high blood pressure, I don't know, high P, high pressure, it's gonna decrease sympathetic output. Okay. Decreasing sympathetic output, what's it gonna do? First off, it's gonna cause the arterioles to relax a bit. Okay. They're gonna start to vasodilate. Okay. So now we're decreasing systemic vascular resistance. Not only that, decreased sympathetic output also decreases the cardiac output at the same time. Look at this table. So the arterial smooth muscle starts to vasodilate. The ventricular myocardium starts to decrease its force in contraction. And the heart rate will also decrease. As a result of this, the peripheral resistance will decrease and the cardiac output will decrease. As a result of this, the blood pressure will decrease. That's how our body kind of regulates the blood pressure in the body. Well, come on, not only that, we also increase parasympathetic output. And when we increase parasympathetic output, we actually decrease the heart rate. Okay. So I hope this makes sense. Is the map also blood pressure? Yeah, mean arterial pressure is basically the blood pressure. You can consider it like that, yeah. So when the aorta recognizes a higher mean arterial pressure, because remember, mean arterial pressure is based on the systolic blood pressure and the diastolic blood pressure. It's based on, it's based on both of these. Yeah, it basically, mean arterial pressure is basically, it's just the mean of the systolic and the diastolic blood pressure. Okay, perfect. So like I said before, the parasympathetic causes a decrease in the heart rate along with decreased sympathetic output. So not only do you have the sympathetic output decreasing, you also have parasympathetic output increasing and acting on the heart, just decreasing the heart rate. Okay. All of this together will decrease the blood pressure. Of course, once the blood pressure is decreased, it'll send negative feedback. So it's going to tell the baroreceptors are going to start to see that, oh, the pressure is decreasing. And khalas, it's going to stop doing all of this regulatory stuff. So after this, the what's it called? The whole goal is to bring the blood pressure back to normal. I wrote all of this in text, but I explained it all on the diagram. I can re-explain with the text if you guys want, but for now I'll move on. So if it makes sense to you guys, I'll just move on. Is there anything in the text? No, there's nothing in the text. Yeah, khalas. Everything in the text is what I explained on the diagram. So we're going to move on to another way to calculate cardiac output. Okay, this one's a bit difficult, but basically, we have fixed O2 method, okay? So we have an equation, cardiac output, okay? So our cardiac output is equal to the oxygen consumed by the body. So the O2 consumed is just the oxygen used by the body every minute, divided by the difference between the, what's it called? The oxygen in the pulmonary veins minus the oxygen in the pulmonary artery. Here, remember, and in the pulmonary veins, the oxygen is, not the oxygen, sorry. The blood is oxygenated. It got blood from the lungs. And in the pulmonary arteries, it still is going to the lungs. It's on its way to the lungs. So it's not oxygenated yet. So I'll show you guys an example of this in this diagram. So we have this 150 milliliters per liter. This is going to be, what's it called? This blood is going back to the heart. Okay, it's going back to the right atrium. So this amount of oxygen in the blood is going to go back to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries to get reoxygenated. Once it gets reoxygenated, it becomes 200 milliliters per liter, okay? And this would be in the pulmonary veins, going back to the left atrium, okay? I hope that makes sense so far. So if we take the difference, so look at this. This blood goes all the way through the system, and once it gets to the end of the system, it drops down to 150. So the difference between the two is 50 milliliters per liter. So what can we do here? Actually, if we rearrange the equation, the original equation looked like this. This is just to make the equation make sense to you guys. So the actual equation was the amount of oxygen consumed is equal to the cardiac output times the difference between these two numbers, these two values. So like I said before, the difference is 50 milliliters per liter. So what's it called? Every time the blood goes around, the circulation, the systemic circulation, it loses 50 milliliters of blood. Or not, sorry, not 50 milliliters of blood, 50 milliliters of oxygen for every liter, okay? And because the heart is pumping out 5 liters per minute, that means the oxygen consumed by our body every minute is just 250, 5 times 50. Does this make sense? But this is how the original equation came about, and we can indirectly measure the cardiac output just by rearranging the equation, okay? But that's all he needs you guys to know, I think, for this equation. That's about it. So I hope it makes sense, yeah? I'll be moving on. Okay, so now we have, what's it called? We have this thing called a catheter, okay? We can send this catheter through the veins, and it goes through the vena cava, and it goes back to the right atrium, okay? And this catheter, it's measuring for pressure, okay? So once it gets to the right atrium, it measures the pressure of the right atrium, okay? I should fix this, but anyway, it measures the pressure of the right atrium. Then it moves on to the right ventricle. It measures the pressure of the right ventricle. Then it goes to the pulmonary artery. It measures the pressure of the pulmonary artery. And at some point, we inflate the balloon, okay? We inflate the balloon, and it stops blood from flowing, okay? And now what the catheter is going to do, actually, when it when it inflates and stops the blood flow, it's going to be measuring the pressure in the left atrium, okay? And this is what we call the wedge pressure, okay? This is the wedge pressure, okay? It's just left atrial pressure. And we use this catheter thing, okay, to diagnose mitral stenosis or congestive heart failure, okay? I'll explain both right now. So when we have mitral stenosis, this is the mitral valve right here, okay? The blood in the left atrium has to go back to the left ventricle, right? But if this valve is stenosed, okay, the left atrium is going to have trouble putting the blood into the left ventricle. So that means there's going to be more volume in the left atrium. And as a result of that, there's going to be an increased pressure in the left atrium. So if we have mitral stenosis, we can diagnose it with this. We're going to see an increased wedge pressure, okay? The normal wedge pressure is like 10 to 12, I think. That's what he wrote in the slides. But you guys don't need to know the value. It's not that important. And if we have congestive heart failure is basically when the left ventricle struggles to pump out the blood from the left ventricle. The left ventricle struggles to pump out blood into the aorta, okay? As a result of that, blood is going to accumulate in the left ventricle. It's eventually going to back up into the left atrium. In congestive heart failure, the blood backs up all the way, through the pulmonary circulation, can go all the way back here. But it's not too important for you guys to know that. But basically, when the blood backs up to the left atrium, we're going to have increased pressure in the left atrium once again. And we can diagnose that by looking at the wedge pressure through this whole catheter thingy. Okay, does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Now we're going to move on to the final, technically the final concept of the lecture. Alhamdulillah, we made it. So remember how I told you guys that the cardiovascular system is closed, nothing leaves, nothing enters? So technically, some fluid can leave the blood vessels and some fluid can enter the blood vessels, okay? And this whole process is mediated by Starling forces, okay? And we'll explain all the Starling forces right now. So we have this equation, and we'll go through it one by one. So the transcapillary fluid movement, or the net filtration pressure, is going to tell us if the blood is moving outside of the blood, not the blood, basically fluid. If fluid is moving outside of the blood vessel or moving back into the blood vessel, okay? That's that. But we have a few forces. We have the capillary hydrostatic pressure, and we have the tissue oncotic pressure. These are both forces that cause fluid to leave the blood vessel. So we're going to start with capillary hydrostatic pressure. Basically, remember how there's pressure in the blood vessel, okay? This pressure can cause fluid to leave, okay? That's it. So the higher pressure you have in the blood vessel, the more fluid will leave because of the capillary hydrostatic pressure, okay? We also have tissue oncotic pressure. So in the interstitium, we have proteins. Okay, normally I don't think we have proteins, but in the interstitium, if for some reason there was proteins, they would suck water towards them, okay? So they also bring fluid outside of the blood vessel. But in this equation, we have PC, which is capillary hydrostatic pressure, and then the tissue oncotic pressure, okay? These are both things that will bring fluid outside of the blood vessel. Next, we're going to talk about things that bring fluid back into the blood vessel. So, interstitial hydrostatic pressure. So imagine if there's fluid here or something. Usually there isn't fluid under normal circumstances. But this fluid would cause pressure over here, and this pressure outside would push fluid back in to the blood vessel, okay? So this is why we minus capillary hydrostatic pressure, minus interstitial hydrostatic pressure. Basically, we're just seeing which one is stronger. So let's say that the interstitial hydrostatic pressure is 30. And over here outside, it's like 10 or something. We're going to minus them, 30 minus 10. And we're going to get 20, which means that a force of 20 millimeters of mercury is pushing fluid outside of the blood vessel. Okay. We also have the plasma oncotic pressure. Plasma oncotic pressure is basically just the proteins in the blood. A huge what's it called? A contributor or like protein that's important for this is albumin. If pressure is more in the vessel, how does it go in? 30 compared to 10. The thing is, it's okay. It's like how do I say it? In this case, the pressure isn't going in. Yeah, the pressure isn't causing it to go in. The pressure inside is overpowering the pressure from outside. So that's why if method we had 10 over here and 30 over here, and when we get a result of 20, right? This result of 20 means that the pressure inside is overpowering the pressure outside. We're gonna have outflow of the fluid. Okay, does that make sense? So مثلا if the pressure here for some reason was stronger, like this was 30 and this was 10, it would be a negative number. We'd get negative 20. And negative 20 would just mean that the pressure outside is overpowering the pressure inside, and you're gonna have more fluid going inside. Don't those two bring black blood in? Which two? The two things, pressures. No, the pressures don't bring bring the blood back in. The pressures are opposing forces. The pressure inside is pushing blood outwards. Okay. The pressure inside is pushing blood outwards. The pressure outside here is pushing blood inwards. So they're opposing forces. They're both opposing forces. That's why we minus them together. Does that make sense? Yeah, the net force. We're looking at the net force basically. So if the pressure inside the blood vessel, which by the way, usually the pressure inside the blood vessel is stronger than the pressure outside, you're gonna have a net pressure outside, going outside. Okay. And the same exact thing with proteins, but proteins, instead of pushing, they pull towards themselves. So, and with the protein, a big protein that's inside blood vessels is albumin. I don't think he expects you guys to know that, but I know albumin is a protein. It's a huge contributor to plasma oncotic pressure. So the proteins inside the blood vessel will pull blood towards it. Okay. Now let's say we have proteins outside. They're going to pull the blood towards them. So now we're going to have to see the net between them. So the capillary oncotic pressure, let's say, and again, it's 30. Okay. So the proteins here are pulling back in with a force of 30. And let's say that the proteins outside are pulling with a force of like 10. I don't know. They're pulling outside with a force of 10. But we're going to get 20 here. Okay. We're going to get an answer of 20 here. And what this means is that actually a pressure of 20 is pulling back towards into the blood vessels. That's why proteins are different. So this is what we call the pulling force. The hydrostatic pressure is called the pushing force. So when I have, I have numbers to add like right now. So let's say we have a capillary hydrostatic pressure of 21. And let's say we have an interstitial hydrostatic pressure of 1. Can anyone calculate the pressure difference really quickly? Pretty sure it's 20. Yeah, it is 20. Imagine. So over here we have, oh, my pen keeps stopped working. Okay, we have a pressure of 21. Okay, inside the blood vessel pushing outwards. In the interstitium, we have a pressure of 1 pushing back into the blood vessel. Okay, so we just minus them and we get a pushing force of 20. Okay, so that means 20 millimeters mercury of pressure are pushing outside. 20. Okay, now we can apply this to what's it called? Colloid pressure or oncotic pressure. Okay, so in the capillaries we have 26, a pressure of 26 pulling towards it, and we have a pressure of 8 outside in the interstitium pulling towards it. So can anyone quickly calculate the difference? Okay, I think it's 18. Yeah, it is 18. Okay, now it's 18, but tell me in which way is the blood going because of this force? Is it going? Is the fluid going inside to the blood vessel or outside of the blood vessel? in. بالضبط, exactly. So we have a stronger force pulling inwards, okay? The proteins here are just so much more. It's pulling inwards with 26, and the proteins outside are pulling with a pressure of 8, okay? When we minus them together, we just get a net pressure or a net pulling force of 18 going inwards, going back inside, okay? How do we know what? Oh, and what's it called? If this number is positive, because once again, we're minusing what's it called? Capillary pressure. So the pressure inside here, we're minusing it from the pressure outside, okay? The pulling force outside. It's better to draw with arrows, yeah. So, and we have this going inside. So this is the capillary osmotic pressure, pulling stuff inside 26. And then we have the interstitial pressure outside, which is what's it called? From the proteins outside. They're pulling towards them with a pressure of 8, okay? When we minus these two values together, this one's bigger, okay? And we get a positive value. Positive value just means that this, because we're calculating the pulling force right now. And since it's positive, we know that this number, which is the capillary wait, does this say pressure? I need to fix this. This should be I don't think this should be P. Yeah, it shouldn't be P. But then no. Since we know that we're minusing capillary oncotic pressure minus the interstitial oncotic pressure, because it's positive, we know that the capillary oncotic pressure is way higher, or we know that it's higher, okay? So that means it's pulling towards the blood vessel. That's how we know. If مثلا this number was negative, that means the interstitial oncotic pressure would be higher than the capillary oncotic pressure, which would mean we'd have a pulling force going outside the blood vessel. Okay, glad it makes sense. Okay, now we've calculated the pushing force and the pulling force. And now we can add everything into this large equation. Okay, this is a constant. Okay, this constant is for vascular permeability. I'll get into vascular permeability later when we talk about edema or like exudate, for example. So for now, it's just a constant. You guys don't need to know this. So we just calculated the pushing force. Okay, the pushing force going outside of the blood vessel. Let's draw a blood vessel here. The hydrostatic pressure has a net force of 20 going outside. Okay, the proteins have an oncotic pressure, a net force of 18 going inside, okay? And we just minus these together. So we get a net filtration pressure, or a JV. JV, I literally forgot what it stands for also. Transcapillary fluid movement. It's better to just memorize net filtration pressure. We have a net filtration pressure of 2. We just minus them, and we get net filtration of 2, okay? So when we have a positive net filtration rate, we have filtration, okay? When we have a negative net filtration pressure, we have absorption. So I'll explain why in a second, or I'll explain why now, okay? If we had a pushing force outside of the blood vessel of 18, and if we had proteins pulling inwards with 20, okay, it would become 18 minus 20. 18 minus 20 would be -2, okay? So in that case, we know the proteins, the pulling force, is pulling inwards with way more force than the pressure is pushing outwards, and the net would be -2 inside, okay? So I hope that makes sense. That's basically it. So once again, positive net filtration pressure, like if it's positive, we get like 2, for example, we're having filtration outside of the blood vessel. If it's negative, we're having absorption back into the blood vessel. Filtration is out. Yeah, filtration is going outside. Absorption is going back inside, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So let's take this +2 that we just got, net filtration pressure. Now we have we have fluid leaving the blood, okay, or the blood vessel. So we have all this fluid, okay? Does anyone know how we get rid of this extra fluid? Lymph, exactly. Okay, perfect. We have the lymphatic system. The lymphatic systems are this little green thing. They suck out the blood, okay? They bring it back to the, lymphatic vessel. They bring it back to the systemic circulation, okay? Let's not go into detail about lymphs. But the lymphatic system takes this blood and cleans it up, okay? So you can already imagine if we had an obstruction in the lymph vessel, we'd have an accumulation of this fluid outside, okay? We'll explain that a bit more later, but then if we have an obstruction of lymph, we might have a problem with this blood, or not this fluid, staying inside the interstitial fluid or interstitial space, okay? So we're going to move on to edema. But first, before we talk about edema, we're going to talk about transidate and exudate. Okay. Transidate is just fluid with no proteins or cells. Okay. So this is caused by changes in the Starling forces. Remember what we were just looking at right now? This is because of Starling forces. The Starling forces that we talked about, which are hydrostatic pressure, oncotic pressure, what's it called? They are in the filtration right now. They're positive. The net filtration rate is positive. So it's going towards filtration outside of the blood vessel. All of this fluid that leaves the blood vessel, it's called transidate, okay? It has no proteins and no cells in it, okay? Now, on the other hand, exudate. Exudate is fluid with proteins and cells, okay? And this is caused by changes in the vascular permeability. Now, if we go back, remember this value right here? This is the constant of vascular permeability, and it can change when we decrease or increase vascular permeability. So I'm going to go back to the blackboard. So you guys know how the blood vessel wall is with endothelium, right? So these are endothelial cells, basically, and they have tight gaps between them, okay? So the proteins and the red blood cells, for example, or the cells flowing through the blood can't go through these holes, okay? They're too tight, okay? But what if we have, like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think you guys need to know too much about this, but if we have an infection, okay, we want, for example, neutrophils or white blood cells to leave the blood and go to the interstitium to fight off the infection. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase the spaces. We're going to increase the vascular permeability. We're going to increase the spaces between the endothelial cells. And this way, the cells and the proteins can leave the blood vessel just fine. This is what is called exudate. This is what exudate is. So it's fluid with proteins and cells. Fluid with proteins and cells because we increase the vascular permeability. Okay, very different from Starling forces. Starling forces, for example, if we increase the hydrostatic pressure, we're going to have more filtration outside, but all of this filtrate has no proteins and no cells. Okay, this is finally the combination of everything of what we talked about with all the oncotic and hydrostatic pressure and stuff. Edema. Edema is the accumulation of excess fluid in the interstitial tissue. Okay. So مثلا, let's go back here. You see all this fluid that's outside here. Let's say we increase the hydrostatic pressure, and this number went from 2 to like 10 or something, maybe even more, 20. I don't know. It could be as high as you want it to be. More fluid is going to go out of the blood vessel, more and more fluid. And at some point, the lymphatics can't take all this fluid up. Okay. So that's why we're going to have edema. Edema actually has multiple causes, okay? I don't think Abdul Jabbar expects you to know everything in this table. He definitely doesn't. He doesn't. He just wants you guys to know the main causes, which is like the actual cause, and then congestive heart failure, I think, which I'll explain right now. So, what's it called? Let's go for the first cause of edema. I explained it right now. We have a blood vessel. If we increase the hydrostatic pressure, if we increase the blood pressure inside the blood vessel, we're going to have an increased hydrostatic pressure. So we have an increased filtration rate outside of the cell, or outside of the blood vessel, sorry. So this can lead to edema, okay? The lymph won't be able to carry it all back, and we're just going to have an accumulation of fluid outside, okay? Now, things that can lead to increased hydrostatic pressure, a big one is congestive heart failure. وهي صراحة, I'm going to go back for this. I think I explained it somewhere here. Okay, yeah. If we have congestive heart failure, I told you guys that the blood backs up, right? The blood's going to back up all the way to the pulmonary circulation. So now the pulmonary circulation is going to have more blood than it used to have before. It's going to have a lot more blood. And a lot more blood leads to more pressure. More hydrostatic pressure leads to more filtration. So that's why in congestive heart failure, you're going to have pulmonary edema, okay? Oh, it's written right here, yeah, pulmonary edema. Here, صراحة, I don't think he expects you to know into this level of detail, but just know that congestive heart failure leads to increased hydrostatic pressure, which causes more net filtration. Now, what if we decrease the proteins in the blood? We decrease the capillary osmotic pressure. So imagine we had this much proteins before. We had so much proteins. Wait, which pressure after you know what they're going? Yeah, sure, I can. Okay. So we had this much proteins before, and they're all pulling blood back into the blood vessel, right? Well, now let's say we decrease the proteins. There's less proteins now. So now the colloid osmotic pressure, or the oncotic pressure in the capillaries, has decreased, okay? So now less fluid is getting sucked back in, okay? And because of this, you can also have an accumulation of fluid. outside, okay? Now another thing, Kf. Kf is the constant we talked about. Oh, wait, before I continue to that, things that can lead to decreased capillary oncotic pressure is like decreased synthesis of proteins. We said that albumin is the most important protein for this. What if your liver stops making proteins? You're going to have decreased proteins. What if you stop eating a lot of protein? What if for some reason your body is excreting a lot of protein? Yeah, Salaha, once again, like I really don't expect you guys to know all of this. I don't think he wants you guys to know all of this, but it's just good to keep in mind, just logically, things that can cause decreased proteins, not eating enough protein, okay? Not making enough protein, okay? Think of it like that. So what about the KF? The KF is just what we talked about earlier. If we have an infection, for example, inflammation, okay? Wait, why is it not more net absorption? What do you mean? Here, over here, like this. Wait, which one? Decreased synthesis of proteins or what? Or are you talking about capillary hydrostatic pressure? Capillary hydrostatic pressure. Yeah, okay. Capillary hydrostatic pressure is the pressure inside. But if we increase the capillary hydrostatic pressure, we're not talking about the interstitial one, the one outside here. So if you increase the pressure inside the vessel, the hydrostatic pressure is going to be pushing the blood, not the blood, the fluid outwards, okay? So that's why it leads to more net filtration, not net absorption. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. So I was talking about inflammation. Inflammation, like I said before, we want blood vessels, not blood vessels. We want cells, white blood cells, to leave the what's called the vessel. So we're going to increase the space between the endothelial cells, and we're going to cause them to leave. Okay. Now you can also imagine that when we increase the space between the endothelial cells, even more fluid can leave. Just more fluid can just straight up leave. So more fluid's going to accumulate outside here. Well, come on, think about it. Proteins can also leave, okay? And these proteins are going to be pulling on the water as well. It's like a whole process, but don't think too much into the details. Just think about it as in we're increasing the spaces between the endothelial cells. As a result of this, more water can flow out. So this can lead to edema, okay? Now, the last example is increased interstitial pressure, okay? Now, remember how I was talking about the lymph? The lymph takes out all the excess fluid back into the blood. Well, if the lymph is obstructed, the lymph can't take the blood back up. Khalas. This fluid that got filtrated is going to stay there. And there's going to be more filtrate all the time. This filtrate is going to accumulate because the lymphatics can't clean up the mess, okay? So when we have lymphatic obstruction, what's going to happen is we're going to have a huge accumulation of fluid. And this accumulation of fluid actually also pushes back into the blood vessel. That's why it's called increased interstitial pressure. Here, that's all you need to know. So lymphatic obstruction would lead to edema. That's it. Because you're not clearing up all the fluid that's left the blood vessel. Okay? I hope all that makes sense. These are a bunch of pictures in the slides. Literally don't focus on them, Salaha. They're not that important, but it's just showing you the difference between exudates and transudates. Exudates is as a result of like inflammation. Okay, after an insect bites you, your capillary permeability is going to increase. Okay, the permeability is going to increase. The spaces between the endothelial cells is going to increase. So you're going to have fluids, proteins, white blood cells. They're all going to leave the blood vessel, and it's going to cause exudates. And this is, yeah, I think this. I don't think you could call this edema. Maybe it's edema. It's swelling of the skin. This is a bump of the skin because a bunch of fluid has accumulated here. Okay. Now over here, you could definitely call this edema. Look at his legs. So much fluid has left his blood vessel to the point that his legs have just swollen up to this point. Look at the arms here as well. They're extremely swollen. There's also pulmonary edema when we were talking about congestive heart failure. In congestive heart failure, what did we say? Increased hydrostatic pressure. So you're going to have increased hydrostatic pressure in the pulmonary circulation, leading to pulmonary edema. So yeah, this slide isn't too important. It's just showing you the difference between transudate and exudate. Exudate, once again, inflammation. Transudate, everything else. Like congestive heart failure, for example. But yeah, alhamdulillah, we're done. That's all of hemodynamics, okay? Unfortunately, we still have 4 questions to do. I hope we can go through them quickly, eh? So let's go for this first question. In a capillary, the hydrostatic pressure is 30 millimeters mercury. The interstitial hydrostatic pressure is -2. Okay, -2. Okay, keep that in mind. What's it called? The capillary oncotic pressure is 25, and the capillary interstitial pressure is 2. So what's the answer? Okay, someone already gave me an answer. I'll wait for one more answer. Oh, it was in the midterm. Oh, it was in the mock. Okay, hopefully the other person didn't take the mock. That's crazy. Okay, it's fine. I'm gonna wait for the other person to see if they'll answer. If not, I'll explain the answer here. Okay, I didn't get an answer, I guess. Oh, nope. Thank you. Yes, exactly. The answer is D. There we go. So the answer is D here. And just to explain it for maybe those who are watching the recording later, maybe, we have a, what's it called? We have a capillary hydrostatic pressure of 30. The pressure, the interstitial pressure is -2. Now, -2 means that it's going like this, okay? Because it's -2, okay? The capillary oncotic pressure is 25. So the proteins inside the blood vessel are pulling with a force of 25, okay? And the interstitial, which is the proteins outside, are pulling the fluid outside the blood vessel with a force of 2 millimeters mercury, okay? So what we just do is we calculate the difference of the hydrostatic pressures and minus it by the differences of the oncotic pressures, just like the equation we saw below, or before, yani. So we have 30, which is capillary hydrostatic pressure, minus the interstitial hydrostatic pressure, which is -2. So the answer here is this. So this would be 32 minus the capillary osmotic pressure, which is 25, minus the interstitial oncotic pressure, which is 2. And this gives us 23. So 32 minus 23. I honestly can't do the math in the head, but math in my head, but I know it's going to be 9. It's going to be equal to 9, okay? 9 is positive, okay? So because it's positive, what did we say about positive? Positive means filtration. Method, and if we got -9, then it would be absorption, okay? So I hope this makes sense. We'll move on to the next question. When do we use the KF constant? I don't think he'll ever give you guys questions with the KF constant. But method, if he did give you guys the KF constant, it would be like this. You just take the answer of this. The answer of this is 9, okay? So let's just simplify things. 9, okay? And you multiply it with the KF constant, okay? And then you'd get the filtration rate. But I know I've never seen a question where they provide you with a KF. But if they did provide you with a KF, you're just going to multiply it with what you got earlier, which is 9, okay? I hope that makes sense. So this is a very simple question, I think. Pulse pressure is what? And I just answer. Okay, someone who shouldn't have answered. Does anyone else want to give it a try? Okay, D. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the answer is D. The reason why is we have to go all the way back, all the way over here. Perfect. Yeah, pulse pressure is estimated by the stroke volume divided by arterial compliance. So pulse pressure is determined by both the stroke volume and the arterial compliance. It's as simple as that. If stroke volume was replaced by arterial compliance, that would also be an answer, okay? Determined by stroke volume and arterial compliance. Okay. This is the third question out of 4. Mr. Jones mixed his medication up with his wife and accidentally took an alpha antagonist drug. Which someone said, I think, which decreased his mean arterial pressure temporarily. So his mean arterial pressure is decreased. As a result of the decreased mean arterial pressure, there will be compensation. So which of the following compensatory changes to sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation of the heart and cardiac output are expected. So what do you guys think will happen? Okay, Ahmed ibn Saud says A. Is it A? Let me think. Okay, wait, let me see what the other answer is. Okay, I said D. Okay, wait, let's see what the answer is. Okay, the answer is A. Okay, and I'll explain why. We have to go all the way back here. Where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it go? Okay, this graph. Remember this graph? Okay. Now, this graph is showing you what happens when the mean arterial pressure increases, okay? But in the case of this question that we just saw, the pressure actually decreased, okay? So the body wants to increase the pressure. So what's it going to do? Instead of decreasing the sympathetic output, it's going to increase the sympathetic output to cause vasoconstriction and to increase the force of the heart. It's also going to decrease parasympathetic output, so the heart rate also increases. So I hope that makes sense. That's a very simple explanation, Yani. I hope I didn't oversimplify it too much, but basically because we want the heart rate, not the heart rate, because we want the pressure to go back up, we're going to increase sympathetic innervation and we're going to decrease parasympathetic innervation. And as a result of that, the cardiac output is going to go back up to what we want it to be in. Or no, not, yeah, because of the sympathetic innervation, the cardiac output will as a result increase, okay? And as a result of all this, the blood pressure is going to go back up to what we want it to be, okay? Does that make sense? Yeah, cardiac output increases with increasing sympathetic. And and with decreasing sympathetic, the cardiac output will also decrease, because remember, cardiac output is, do I have any space to write this? Stroke volume times heart rate, okay? Decreasing the parasympathetic innervation will decrease the heart rate. As a result, the cardiac output will decrease, come on. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. So this is basically the opposite of what we took. What we took earlier was what happens when the pressure increases. Now this is what happens when the pressure decreases. Okay, perfect. Last question, guys. We made it. Okay. A patient at rest is given a drug that reduces venous compliance but has no other cardiac or vascular effects. What effect will this drug have on venous return and venous blood capacity? Venous return is increasing, venous blood capacity decreases. Okay. I'll wait for another answer and then I'll just reveal the answer. Okay, I didn't get another answer, unfortunately, but the answer is E. Okay. And to answer this, we'll just go all the way back again. I don't remember which slide exactly, actually. Hassan, wait. What was the question again? Venus return. Okay, perfect. We don't have to go back that much. Where did it go? Oh yeah, we have to go back a lot. Never mind. Okay, this graph. Okay, when we increase the venous tone, look what happens. The pressure increases and the volume also decreases. Look, the volume went from point A to point C. So the volume went from this to this because we increased the tone of the veins. Okay? When that happens, I explained this before. When we increase the tone, because of the valves, the blood can't flow backwards. Okay? There's no backflow. So the blood has no choice but to go back to the heart. So in that way, we increase the venous return. Okay? So that should be the explanation for that question. I hope that makes sense. Because we increase the tone, the venous return goes all the way, like the blood gets displaced back to the heart, and the venous blood capacity decreases. The veins can now hold less volume. What do you mean by volume increases? Yeah, the volume doesn't increase. The volume in the veins decreases because we're increasing the tone. If you want, I can go back to the graph. Okay. Did I miss the graph? No, I did not. Where's the graph at? Perfect. The graph is right here. Okay. So this is the normal compliance of the vein. Okay. Look at the volume. The volume's over here. Okay. This is what happens when we increase the tone. Okay. Now, the thing is, when we increase the tone, the pressure also increases. It's not going to go down like this. It's going to go like this. The pressure increases, so it's going to go from point A to point C. Now, anyways, either way, at point C, look at the volume. The volume has decreased. Okay, went down from here to here. Okay, not only that, the pressure also increased because of the venous tone. Okay, so as a result of this, what's it called? This decrease in the volume, this volume that we just lost is going to get displaced back to the heart. Okay, because we increased the what's it called? The venous tone. Okay, does that make sense? Perfect, amazing. Okay, guys, alhamdulillah, you guys made it to the end of the lecture. Thank you guys for sticking with me for this whole time. I really hope that everything made sense for you guys. If you guys have any feedback, like, oh, my slides look ugly, or maybe my explanation was good, maybe my explanation was bad, you can scan the QR code. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys so much.